Wreylith, a Fire and Fang story by Lindsay Baroker, narrated by Vivian Laney. Chapter 1. When a knock sounded on the door to the cabin, newly crowned Queen Erasbella tucked her sword behind a chair, sprang into the seat, and opened a book to lay in her lap. Her spectacles drooped down her nose, and she hurried to push them back into place, assuming a suitably regal position, she hoped. As the door opened, her younger sister, Catella, walked in without waiting for an invitation. A bead of sweat slid down the side of Erasbella's nose. Catella tucked a lock of raven hair behind her ear, then pointed at the book. "Are you actually doing something appropriate for the new ruler of the guarding kingdom? As queen, I set the cultural trends, don't I? Isn't everything I do appropriate?" "No." Erasbella shared a smirk with her sister. "That dagger you use as a bookmark," Catella said, "isn't appropriate for a lady of any social class." "This is a letter opener, not a dagger. It's so sharp you could shave with it. Fortunately, my chin hair doesn't require such attention." Erasbella stroked her smooth jaw. No poets had ever waxed lyrical on the great beauty of her pointed nose, bespectacled gray eyes, or sharp cheeks, but none had accused her of mannish attributes either. Too bad. Then maybe Lord Garringtor wouldn't be willing to marry her. She couldn't believe she'd had to sail halfway across the kingdom to the island he governed so he could look aloofly at her for the entire afternoon, never smiling or suggesting he had any charm or a sense of humor at all. If not for the man's magical blood and family connections, her father never would have arranged the marriage before his passing. Catella pointed at the book again. At least she hadn't noticed the sword behind the chair. Then had to grip a post as the dolphin's spirit rocked as it crested a wave. "What happened to the pressed leaf bookmark that our niece made for you last Winterfest?" "I think the letter opener cut it in half." "Because it's a dagger." "It's protection if I'm ever set upon by pirates or bandits." "Queens have bodyguards, so they don't need to carry weapons." Catella tilted her pointing finger toward the tight corridor outside the cabin, where Sergeant Oxtor loomed by the door. "You know so much about the requirements that it's a shame you aren't the older sister. The people would have revolted if I'd been crowned queen. They love you. They're afraid of me, and Lord Zarquad has the newspapers calling me a prickly shrub." Catella appeared far more pleased than disturbed by that. Neither of them had wanted this duty, which came with an arranged marriage, as well as onerous political maneuvering, and the overwhelming responsibility of making decisions for an entire kingdom. If only father had lived forever. "At the harvest ball," Erasbella said, "you threatened to pound on his tallywhacker with a meat tenderizer." "I believe that's what he considered prickly, yes." Catella still looked more pleased than disturbed. "He rubbed up against me in the second dance of the night. He's a pervert. Have you yet accepted that you'll cheerfully wed Lord Garringtor and have babies so there's no chance that I'll end up as queen?" "Cheerfully?" "He's not a pervert." "What an accolade." "He's decent and moon-marked, but not so close a relative that it's scandalous." Catella waved at the quarter-moon birthmark on the back of Erasbella's hand, a mark she shared. Gifts from the gods, they lent people magical power in line with their passions and marked them as the chosen successors to the throne of the guarding kingdom. "I know. Aside from being 20 years older than me, as humorless as a boulder, and incapable of twisting his lips into a smile, he's fine." "He's rational, doesn't care about power, and uses his magic responsibly." "I do believe they write romance novels about rational, responsible heroes." "They should. You're going to be an unorthodox queen. You'll need a steadying force and—" The ship rocked again, and a clunk came from behind the chair, Erasbella's sword falling and skidding into view. Catella pursed her lips. "I knew it." Before she could point in the bodyguard's direction again, Erasbella said, "Royalty gets targeted by assassins all the time. History is littered with examples." She waved to the history books tucked into a glass-covered case built into the wall above the bunk. She'd read them all, at least twice. "Studying weapons training is wise, not inappropriate. Oxtor can't." "Dragon sighted!" came a distant cry from the crow's nest. "All hands on deck!" Erasbella put her book aside, stood, and snatched up the sword. "That's not going to do anything against a dragon." Catella's fingers tightened on the support post, and she peered warily out one of the portholes. "More than the letter opener would." Grim now, Catella shook her head. "I doubt it." The great red dragon, Wreylith, slowed the flap of her powerful wings as her wayward niece came into view, flying low over a human sailing vessel. Painted all black, emanating a touch of magic, and riddled with harpoon launchers and cannons, it flew a blood-red flag with crossed swords. A pirate ship rather than one of the kingdom vessels. Not that Wreylith cared an iota about the sailings of humans. She'd come to collect her sister's young and immature offspring. A pale red dragon, not yet having come into her adult vibrancy, or even finished growing her horns, Giamanda flew low behind the pirate ship, eyeing a raft on a rope trailing behind it. A man in black with his arms folded over his chest watched her from the stern of the ship, a scimitar hanging from his hip and a hint of magic about him, just detectable over that of the vessel. Normally, any amount of magic in a human, though rare, would make Wreylith sniff with disdain. But the way he stood, with fearless confidence, as not one but two dragons approached, made her suspicious. Were those haunches of meat resting on that raft? "It's a trap," Wreylith told Giamanda, and flapped her wings harder to catch up.
"I think that's Eliok,"
came Giamanda's young voice as she replied telepathically.
"I've never had it, but I've heard about its magnificence."
"They're using it to lure you in." Wreylith eyed the horizon ahead of the pirate ship, where a gold-painted, three-masted schooner was visible cutting through the waves. Numerous military vessels accompanied it, some almost as dotted with weapons as the pirate ship. Far in the distance, one of the 12 islands that the Garden Kingdom claimed was visible. Lush green land masses protected not only from storms, but also from dragons, wyverns, cloud strikers, and other aerial predators by magical sky shields that the gods had created before leaving the world. The reach of those shields did not extend over the Sea of Storms, however, so when ships sailed between the islands, they were vulnerable to attacks. Pirates were usually wiser than to tempt fate by luring in dragons. Did that captain realize how young and inexperienced Giamanda was?
"I'm fast," she proclaimed. "They won't catch me."
"You probably can dodge their cannons and harpoons, but watch out for the one observing you from the deck. He's plotting something. I may slay him for his impertinence."
"While you slay him, I'll get you some Eliok."
Temptation crept into Wreylith, the taste buds in her great maw watering at the thought of Eliok meat. Normally, only freshly caught prey would entice her, not meat that had been sitting out for who knew how long. But the nearly extinct animals were almost impossible to find outside of the protected islands of the kingdom. A taste of a haunch would be magnificent, especially after a long flight. But after living many centuries, Wreylith was wise to the schemes of men. "It's a trap," she repeated firmly. "Leave it. Let some foolish, domesticated dragon with a human rider fall for this nonsense."
"I can smell it over the salt and the sea. It's wondrous."
Giamanda flapped her wings and dove toward the raft.
"I'm just going to get one piece."
Wreylith growled and flew after her niece, knowing she would regret getting involved, especially when the pirate looked over his shoulder toward the kingdom's ships. Though the sails of his ship had to obey the whims of the same winds, it was managing to sail directly toward them, and he nodded as if this was exactly what he'd planned. "Harry, the military ships guarding the royal schooner." A male voice spoke into Wreylith's mind, startling her. Was that the human? Even though he had magic, she hadn't expected him to be able to speak telepathically to her. "And I'll give you these fine Elia conches as a reward. Should I successfully kidnap the queen from her ship, I've 4 more haunches in the hold that would look fabulous dangling from your maws." "Dragons cannot be bribed!" Wreylith boomed into his mind, skewering him across the distance with her golden eyes. Eyes that her enemies all knew glowed because of the great power her lineage and years gave her. "I will slay you for your impertinence." The pirate smirked and waved at her. The audacity! Young Giamonda flew over the pirate ship, heading toward the escort vessels, eager to harry them and earn 5 haunches of Iliac meat. Wreylith growled again. This would not go well. Chapter 2. It was a pirate ship, not the dragons, that attacked the dolphin's spirit. Nose pressed to the porthole window, Erasbella watched as the huge black vessel angled closer, a sword-like ram on the front, and cannons and harpoon launchers lining every foot of railing along the deck. Even without the black paint and blood-red flag promising death, it would have been recognizable to anyone in the kingdom as the infamous pirate ship, the Storm's Wrath. Already it was firing at the 6 military escort vessels surrounding the dolphin's spirit. Had the pirate vessel been solitary, Erasbella would have been certain her people could drive it off. But 2 dragons flew above it. How had the notorious Captain Terror Tavrock lured their kind to help him? There were rumors that he'd once been a dragon rider, associated with the wild tribes. But wasn't he exiled? And vilely plying his evil trade and sinking and thieving from kingdom ships purely for his own gain? The door opened and Sergeant Oxtor leaned in, his chain-mailed tunic gleaming over his bodyguard's uniform. A handsome 30-something, he smirked at the sword in Erasbella's hand. "I see you're prepared to stay put in your cabin and keep yourself busy with your needlepoint, a suggestion the captain insisted I put into your head." "I have my needlepoint, right here." Erasbella lifted her sword. Even Catella, alarmed by the turn of events, held a weapon, the previously discussed shaving-capable letter opener. "I can see that, but stay put anyway, will you? I'd be devastated by your loss." Humor glinted in his eyes, but Oxtor doubtless meant it. Erasbella had, one drunken night right after her father's passing, taken solace in his arms, and he'd been extra dedicated to his bodyguard duties since then. She'd considered the night a mistake. When her mother had lived, she'd chastised her about flirting with the staff. But she would have chosen another night with Oxtor over Lord Garrington any day. "And flogged by your superiors," Erasbella said, saying nothing of their past. "That's why I'd be devastated." Oxtor winked, flicked an irreverent salute toward Catella, and leaned back out, closing the door with a thump. "He's not appropriate either," Catella said. "Did you see how he looked at your boobs? When there are dragons in the sky?" Would his attention have been more appropriate if the sky were clear? "No!" Cannons boomed, the pirate ship firing at the Dolphin. Fearless in the face of the military escort vessels, it veered toward the port side of the schooner. Of course, with 2 dragons accompanying it, why wouldn't the pirates be fearless? One dragon was a deep red with glowing eyes, and the other a paler hue of the same color. Smoke wafted from the nostrils of each, a promise of the fire they could unleash on Erasbella's people. Sword in hand, she strode toward the door. "I have to help." "Help what? Be incinerated?" Catella asked, eyes round as she stared out the porthole. The paler red dragon was diving toward an escort ship right beside them. opening its maws wide with glee. It dodged cannon fire and breathed fire at the deck of the vessel. Seeing that raw power, and hearing the screams of people even through the closed porthole, filled Erasbella with fear. But she couldn't hide while those sworn to protect her died. She'd only been queen for 3 weeks, damn it. She couldn't start losing people already. "We'll take the fight to the pirate ship," Erasbella continued to the door. "If they're allied with the dragons, or somehow even commanding them, then sinking the storm's wrath should end the threat." When she reached the door, she tugged to open it. But it didn't budge. Had Sergeant Oxtor locked her in?
Queens don't single-handedly sink ships.
"You're welcome to come add your hands. Did you bring your meat tenderizer along?"
To your engagement luncheon? No.
Erasbella banged the hilt on the door. "Sergeant, let me out! I can help, you know I can!" Her bodyguard had to be out there, but booms from the deck above drowned out her words. A great snapping and wrenching came from the bow of the ship, and a shudder coursed through the deck. Had the pirates rammed them? Outside the porthole, the paler red dragon flew past with the schooner's dolphin figurehead, now charred almost beyond recognition, dangling from its maw. Worse than ramming. Erasbella pounded again on the door. "Sergeant Oxtor!" Shouts, clangs, and the cracks of hand cannons sounded in the corridor.
"Get away from the door, we have to hide!"
Cattell appeared around the cabin. Though spacious compared to crew quarters, there wasn't any place for such an activity. Her gaze shifted to the porthole. "We're not going for a swim." Clangs came from right outside the door. Sword up, Erasbella backed up and crouched. Fire turned the world outside the porthole bright orange, and the smell of smoke wafted to her. She wiped her damp palm on her dress before returning it to her sword hilt, grim with the realization that her reign might end before she'd sat on the throne for a full month. Something smashed against the door, and it flew open. Men wielding scimitars and cutlasses leaped over someone bleeding and groaning on the corridor floor. Sergeant Oxtor. "There she is!" a young man with spiky blonde hair blurted, pointing a sword at Erasbella. "The one with spectacles."
"I'm the one with a sword,"
Erasbella snarled, irrationally irritated that pirates would identify her based on her myopia. "And it's quite a fine sword, too," the second pirate to enter the cabin said, smirking as he eyed it, and her. Darker-skinned, with curly black hair, he raked his brown eyes over her, presumptuously taking in body parts well below her spectacles. "I'm fortunate that mine is bigger." He held up a scimitar made from legendary gargoyle bone, the magical creatures lending their power to blades even long after their death. Usually, dragon riders wielded such weapons, often killing the gargoyles to collect the materials for the making themselves. The pirate had probably stolen it. "Is it bigger than your ego?" Erasbella asked, aware of the blonde man creeping toward her with a gag and ropes as well as a blade. "Oh, certainly not," the black-haired pirate said. "What a thing to ask of a sword." Weapons clanged and fired in the corridor, and someone shouted, "Protect the Queen!" But fire also burned out there, and the voice was distant. Erasbella, suspecting she was on her own, willed her body to relax so that she could swing her blade quickly and precisely. The dark-haired pirate saluted her with his scimitar. Before striding forward, she glimpsed a faded purple dragon tattoo on the back of his hand and blinked in surprise. Only Stormer riders who'd magically bonded with their dragons had such marks. This had to be the pirate captain, Terror Tavrock. But if he was exiled, he couldn't still be linked to a dragon, could he be? Outside, the larger red dragon soared past. Erasbella stood her ground, but couldn't help but feel daunted. Smoke hazed the corridor beyond the open door, and flames crackled nearby. 2 more figures stepped past the semi-conscious Sergeant Oxtor, 2 more pirates. As the pair of enemies already inside the cabin stalked toward her, Erasbella feared she wouldn't survive this. But she wouldn't fall to her knees and beg for her life. Jaw set, she lifted her sword higher. When the blond man passed her sister, his focus on Erasbella, Catella cracked him on the back of the head with a book. The tattooed pirate laughed. "Now you deserve that for leaving an enemy at your back." His laugh didn't last long. As the blond man spun to deal with Catella, Tavrok sprang for Erasbella with his magical scimitar. It didn't slash toward her throat or another vital target, but toward her hand, the flat of the blade leading. Belatedly, as she swept her sword up to parry the blow, she realized they meant to kidnap her, not kill her. That wasn't any more heartening than the promise of death. Tavrok's dark eyebrows lifted in surprise when she accurately parried the blade. What, did he think she carried a sword around without knowing how to use it? But he didn't hesitate to attack again. A rapid series of slashes came at her with startling speed, forcing her back until she bumped against her bunk. The moon mark on the back of her hand tingled and warmed, and magic flowed into her body and into her sword, reinvigorating her and sharpening her sight and other senses. Tavrok's attacks seemed to slow as she read his movements more clearly and anticipated the trajectory of his blade. Again his eyebrows twitched, and he glanced at the back of her hand, the quarter-moon birthmark glowing a faint silver. Beyond the porthole, a red, scaled figure blocked out the light. Flying past close, the great dragon peered into the cabin, one of its slitted reptilian eyes glowing golden. Startled, Erasbella and the pirate paused to stare until the dragon soared out of sight. Recovering quickly, Erasbella stepped away from the bunk and launched a series of blows at her foe. If this was indeed the pirate captain, he was in charge. If she could best him, she might have a chance of getting out of this without being kidnapped. But Tavrok was up to the challenge. The bastard even smiled, and he didn't give ground, merely parrying every attack she threw. As if he'd been born with a weapon in his hand, he made it appear effortless. Meanwhile, Erasbella's spectacles threatened to slip down her nose, if not fly from her ears altogether. Why, when all this had started, hadn't she thought to grab the head strap for them? A gasp came from the side. Catella. The blonde pirate had subdued her and held her against his chest, a dagger to her throat. Indecision blasted Erasbella, especially when the two pirates from the corridor stepped inside. Desperate, she launched a combination of attacks at Tavrok, a last hope of besting him and somehow turning the tides. But he deflected them. Not only that, but he sprang at her, almost blurring with the speed of his movement, and caught her wrist. He twisted it to elicit pain that made her gasp and drop her sword. In an instant, she found herself disarmed and pulled against his chest, a powerful arm keeping her there. Erasbella tried to stomp on the pirate's boot, but he moved his foot aside in time to escape it. Worse, he tightened his grip on her, crushing her ribs so that she could scarcely breathe. Across the cabin, Catella looked at her. The blonde pirate's hand flattened to her mouth from an equally helpless position. Erasbella wanted to scream in frustration, but she doubted anyone was free to come to her aid. "Such a spirited opponent," Tavrok said, amusement in his voice. But was that a hint of respect, too? If he hadn't been a loathsome enemy, it might have been flattering. "I never would have expected the young queen to be a sword master." Not a master, but she'd practiced many hours. Unfortunately, it hadn't been enough to best the pirate captain. Erasbella tried to tell herself that she would have another chance. If they kidnapped her, she could find an opportunity to escape. "That was impressive, sir," the blonde pirate said. "Her people will pay a lot to get her back, I bet." "That's the plan." Captain Tavrok kept Erasbella restrained, but he patted her body with his free hand. "Tie that one up and leave her. If the newspapers are any judge, the people won't pay to get the sister back." Rage burned in Catella's eyes, and she tried to bite her captor's hand. Judging by his wince, she got at least some tender skin. "I think that's right, sir," Tavrok snorted. When you're done, bring your rope over here. This one is dangerous enough that we'd best not underestimate her. His touch was far too intimate as he traced her curves. Erasbella growled, "Handsy bastard!" Do pardon me, your royalness, but after facing you, I suspect you might be the kind of lady to keep daggers stashed about your body.
They wouldn't be in my brasserie. Erasbella scowled at him, and at his hand cupping her breast.
No, where might they be? Strapped to your inner thigh, perhaps.
Tavrock slid his hand lower. He did genuinely seem to be checking for sharp objects that might be secreted under her dress, but the languidness of his search suggested he was enjoying the excuse to fondle her. At least his touch wasn't painful or cruel. He was handsome enough, with a roguish glint to his eyes that, under other circumstances, Erasbella might have enjoyed the attention. But he was in the process of kidnapping her. It enraged her rather than arousing her. "There's a sharp letter opener that I use as a bookmark," she said. "Bring it to me and I'll show it to you."
By poking me in my eye.
"I'll poke it into every orifice I can reach."
Goodness, never would I have expected royalty to suggest orifice jabbing to me.
Tavrock finished his search with a gentle pat on her shoulder, then pointed to one of his men. Before he issued whatever order he'd intended, Catella tried to stomp on the foot of her captor. She caught his instep and he groaned, but he didn't release her.
"Those are some feisty women for royals," one of the pirates near the door observed.
"Any chance we can kill this one?" the blond man asked. Erasbella roared at the suggestion and jabbed her elbow into Tavrock's ribs.
"No," Tavrock said calmly, the blow barely affecting him. "Tie that one and leave her. We're only here to make some coin, not incense the kingdom to send its fleet after us for decades." His voice turned grim. "I've already got one mortal enemy."
He snapped his fingers toward one of his men. "Only one?" Erasbella couldn't believe legions weren't hunting down the pirate. "That can't be sufficient."
"It's a big one,"
Tavrock said, without the snark that had laced his other words. As his men brought a gag and rope for binding Erasbella, the pale red dragon flew within view of the porthole, drawing her attention in that direction. No fewer than 4 ships burned on the waves. For the first time, her shoulders slumped in defeat. A shadow darkened the porthole again, deep red scales blotting out the view. This time, the dragon lowered its head from above. Was it perched on the railing and bending over? A fearsome golden eye glowed as it looked through the porthole.
"You have dared manipulate a dragon!"
A telepathic voice boomed in Erasbella's mind. She started to protest, but the dragon only glanced at her. Instead, the large eye focused on Captain Tavrock.
"Do not think you will survive the day, pirate."
"Is that the big enemy?" Erasbella asked into the silence that descended on the cabin. One of the captain's expressive eyebrows rose.
"Believe it or not, no."
"You may have acquired a new one, sir," the blonde pirate said. "Was it worth it?" As one, all 4 pirates looked at Erasbella. She lifted her chin defiantly.
"We'll find out,"
Tavrock said. Chapter 3. "You can't slay him, Aunt Wreylith," Giamanda munched Eliak cheerfully from the raft floating in the ocean. The dastardly humans had untied it and the haunches of meat, leaving it to drift free of the pirate vessel. "He promised more Eliak meat, and it's so delicious. Come down and have some. You'll feel better, less crabby."
"I'm wise, not crabby."
Wreylith snapped as she flew circles around the ships below, smoke wafting from many of them, and some on the verge of sinking. Her niece had been very enthusiastic about lighting the human ships ablaze. Normally, Wreylith wouldn't care one iota about such antics. But she worried Giamanda was getting herself in trouble. As young and spry as she was, some of those cannonballs had almost struck her. Even now, as Wreylith flew around the area, she waited to see if those haunches were poisoned. If they were, she would without hesitation slay the pirate captain and every greasy crewman assisting him with whatever his conniving plans were. Kidnapping that female, apparently. The audacity tempted Wreylith to slay the man now, especially since, as Wreylith had been flying low, keeping an eye on her vulnerable niece, she'd glimpsed the female fighting nobly for her life. She'd sensed that the pirate had some lingering magic from a past dragon bond, but the female, with magic of her own, had kept him at bay, only succumbing because she'd been outnumbered. Wreylith found humans puny, weak, whiny, and scarcely worth acknowledging. But she did admire anyone, even a lowly one, who fought bravely against superior predators.
You'd be even more not crabby if you joined me in sharing this delicious meat.
Giamanda's tail swished happily in the water as it dangled off the edge of the raft. There was only one haunch remaining, and she wasn't yet showing signs that she'd been poisoned. But that pirate captain was not to be trusted. As Wreylith flew another lap over the smoldering ships, the captain launched a dinghy that would take him and his boarding party back to the black-painted vessel with their prize. Wrists tied behind her back, the female knelt in the middle, a prisoner, though she did not appear fully defeated. She looked all about, even gazing boldly toward the dragons, and appeared to be plotting an escape. Good. If the pirate was taking her for a forced mating, that was unacceptable. Wreylith hoped she would successfully get the best of him. Hands on their weapons, the pirates watched Wreylith as she circled, watching over her niece. Those weapons didn't concern Wreylith in the least. In the past, she'd been struck by cannonballs, and had soon recovered from the wounds. She bared her fangs at the men, half tempted to pluck their imprisoned female away from them. But this tiff was none of her concern.
Send more meat to the raft for the brave dragons who assisted us today,
the pirate captain called to the men at the railing of his ship. Wreylith snorted, tempted anew to flambe him. Even if the meat wasn't poisoned, the presumptuousness to bribe a dragon. It should be punished, not tolerated. But Giamanda, the other haunches finished, sprang into the air, and twirled like a hatchling 3 days out of her egg. How long until you grow into a powerful hunter that cows all prey on land and in the sea? Wreylith asked. Her niece alighted on the wheelhouse of the pirate ship.
Maybe after this meal. It's so good, Wreylith. I can't believe you won't join me.
Soon you'll be leaping through hoops for fish doled out by humans, like a trained dolphin. Though the pirates looked nervous, they obeyed their leader and brought out more meat. Just as Wreylith had envisioned, they tossed the haunches to Giamanda, who caught them and chewed happily. Was she sniffing them for traces of poisonous substances before putting them in her mouth? Wreylith would have to inform her younger sister that Giamanda, far too trusting and naive, wouldn't likely survive in this world. Such undragonly behavior, Wreylith said. Perhaps you could bond yourself to one of them, then be at their beck and call like the pathetic domestic dragons tamed by the Stormers.
If you tried this meat, you'd understand why I'm so motivated by it. So delicious.
I've had iliac before, that I hunted with my own fangs.
Then you understand.
Wreylith flicked her tail. I'm leaving you. You'll have to learn for yourself not to trust humans. Just because they're puny doesn't mean they can't be dangerous. Their insidious minds are full of deception.
Wise words.
Giamanda caught another iliac haunch, tossed by the pirates. Wreylith flew away. Some dragons simply couldn't be helped. After stealing away with her in a dinghy, the pirates forced Erasbella to board their ship, every inch of it painted an ominous black. Surprisingly, magic emanated from the body of the craft, as well as something, or multiple somethings, in its interior. Were there some powerful artifacts below decks that had allowed them to gain the assistance of the dragons? The creature with deep red scales had disappeared, but the pale red dragon perched atop the wheelhouse like a mascot, gnawing on a haunch of meat as its tail swished back and forth. Erasbella adjusted her spectacles. Her captors hadn't let her pack or take much of anything from her cabin, but she had managed to snatch the strap on the way out the door, so the frame perched snugly on her nose as she gazed back at her ship. Smoldering, the dolphin's spirit bobbed on the waves, and she lamented that she hadn't been able to do anything to help the crew. The pirates had left her sister behind, bound and gagged, but otherwise unharmed. But how many others had been injured or killed? Her bodyguard had stirred as she'd been forced past him, and she was glad he'd survived. But she doubted the entire crew had been that lucky. And what of the men and women who'd fought on the military escort vessels? Thanks to the dragons, especially that lighter red one, most of them were burning, with 2 already sinking. All this because they'd wanted to kidnap her. For money, apparently. Erasbella glared at Captain Tavrock, disappointed that he'd disarmed her and left her sword behind. Surrounded by so many men, she couldn't have killed him regardless. She would have to bide her time, find a dagger or other small weapon, and catch him alone. If she killed him and sneaked away in one of the 2 dinghies mounted near a rail, she might survive. Before long, her people would learn about the carnage and come looking for her. Tavrock turned to face her. Erasbella didn't bother smoothing the hatred from her face. Never has a woman who hasn't slept with me glared at me with such utter loathing, he remarked, a briny breeze sweeping across the deck and tousling his curly dark hair. Amusement glinted in his deep brown eyes. As she'd noted before, he would have been handsome if he hadn't been a bastard. Does your dismal performance in bed prompt such feelings from your partners? Erasbella looked around the ship, eyeing the cannons and harpoon launchers, but such weapons were too large for her plans. She needed to abscond with a dagger that she could slip between Tavrock's ribs. Oh, certainly not. In the bunk, my adept maneuvers prompt women to writhe with passion and scream out my name with unrestrained desire as I take their bodies to heights of ecstasy such as they've never known. The surrounding men either snorted or rolled their eyes. Erasbella did both. So it's after sex that you piss them off. Inevitably, your royalness, due to my irrepressibility, irreverence, and irritating smugness, I understand. It's your majesty, and I have no trouble believing that. I'm an honest pirate. Tavrock bowed to her. May I call you Erasbella? No, you may not. You may, of course, call me Tavrock, or your magnificence if you'd like, as those who join me in the bunk so often do. I'll bet. Erasbella folded her arms over her chest. How much money are you going to attempt to ransom me for? I'll need straight gold to appeal to the sensibilities of the mad cannibals in the Arctic archipelagos, or Archies, as we call those islands. Erasbella blinked at the obscure reference. There were legends of men and women living in the islands of the far north, people who'd left the kingdom for freedom and to subsist upon the walruses and whales that traveled those waters, only to eventually be driven crazy by magical squalls that constantly afflicted the area. Supposedly the storm god had, in his madness, used the islands for experiments that had altered the climate. But the history books suggested those people had long since killed each other off, if they'd ever existed at all. That's what they trade in, you see, Tavrock explained, having little use for kingdom currency or even the silver coins that the Stormers use. They also very rarely trade in ice jade, a magical substance found only on those islands. I'm in need of some. Why? Why, I'm a collector, of course. Tavrock bowed again. Erasbella suspected the supposedly honest pirate was lying to her. Should you have some in the kingdom vaults, I would also accept that, in lieu of gold, as payment for your safe return. Tavrock straightened and arched his eyebrows as he considered her, perhaps thinking that a possibility. There were some gems and magical items in the vault in the castle, but even if his ice jade had been there, Erasbella wouldn't have promised it, or anything else to him. She intended to escape, not allow her people to be bribed on her behalf during her first month on the throne. We do not, she said. Gold it is, then. Tavrock lifted a hand and started to say more, but he frowned instead and turned toward the dragon. It hadn't finished its meal, but its tail had gone rigid, and it looked toward the horizon. At first, Erasbella thought the other red dragon might be returning, but Tavrock's curse suggested something unexpected and dire. The black dragon is coming. Tavrock drew his scimitar and pointed the tip skyward. Everyone, man the weapons. We've another battle on our hands. Hatzel, secure our prisoner. He started toward the bow of the ship, but paused to turn and bow again to Erasbella. My apologies, Your Majesty. Had I known he was in the area, I wouldn't have brought you here and risked your life. Without waiting for a response, Tavrock ran to join the crew, readying the cannons mounted around the bow of the ship. As a pirate took her arm, all Erasbella could think was that they were in deep trouble. Not only had the captain apologized to her, but he'd addressed her properly. This can't be good, she murmured. It's not, the pirate said, leading her toward a ship's ladder heading below decks. The Black Dragon wants nothing more than to slay Captain Tavrock, and it would be pleased to destroy our ship and everyone around him in the process. Another pirate met them at the ladder, holding lengths of rope aloft. We'll tie her before stashing her away. The captain won't want her escaping during the battle. Right. Erasbella tried to step back. If you tie me, I'll be more vulnerable. What if the dragon sinks the ship, and I'm drowning and can't swim with my arms bound? Your vulnerability isn't a big priority to me, Queen. The speaker glanced toward the horizon, where a great black dragon had flown into view. A deep brown one accompanied it, and the man swore. He's got an ally. It'll be even harder to drive him off this time. This time? Despite her struggles, Erasbella couldn't escape the two men, or hinder their effort to pull her arms behind her back and tie her wrists together. She did her best to shift her limbs to try to make space so she could maneuver out of the bindings later. Does a ship get attacked by dragons regularly? Only by that dragon. The man pointed at the black. On a weapons platform next to the wheelhouse, Tavrock knelt between two cannons. As men prepared them to fire, he opened a metal chest. Abruptly, Erasbella sensed magic within it. Before, it had been insulated, but her hand tingled with awareness now. As the dragons flew nearer, Tavrock drew out cannonballs that appeared ordinary, but emanated power. He helped his men load two of them, choosing cannons on mounts that could spin about to track something in the sky. The pale red dragon on top of the wheelhouse shifted, preparing to spring into the air, and a half-eaten haunch of meat tumbled to the deck. The dragon paused to look down, then at the approaching foes, and finally down again. Torn by indecision. Will that one help us again, sir? A pirate pointed at the wheelhouse. Tavrock looked toward the pale red dragon and shook his head. She's scarcely more than a hatchling. They'll tear her up. Better her than us, someone muttered. The dragons are in range, Tavrock said. Start firing. The pirate tying Erasbella finished the job, though his gaze was on the approaching threat. He pushed her toward the ship's ladder. Find somewhere to hide under there, Queen, and hope that ship doesn't get sunk. Since Erasbella had expected to be stuffed into a cell, she stared in surprise as the pirate ran off to grab a crossbow and face the dragons instead of remaining with her. She hesitated. Her mission was to escape, but the idea of hiding from a threat rankled. Not much you could do, she told herself and turned, intending to head below decks, where she could search for a knife to cut the ropes. But an archer with a bow and quiver ran past, and an arrow fell to the deck. The steel head wouldn't be as handy as a knife, but it might do. A thunderous roar came from the sea, from the black dragon in the lead. The cannons boomed in response. With her wrists bound behind her, picking up the arrow wasn't easy. Erasbella had to drop to her knees and turn her back to it. Then the deck tilted as the ship crested a wave and it skidded away from her. On her knees, she scrambled awkwardly after it. Fortunately, all of the pirates' attention was locked onto the dragons. Both huge and powerful, they approached with their great fanged maws parted, fire roiling in the backs of their throats. The black dove toward the bow of the ship as the brown flew around it, drawing fire. The cannonballs skimmed past above and below as the dragons danced in the air, avoiding the projectiles. In the bow of the ship, Tavrock had taken the burning brand that would light one of the cannons loaded with his special balls, but he was waiting for the right shot. The pale red dragon screeched at the attackers, then hopped to the deck, snatched up the Iliac, and launched herself away from the ship. The black dragon flew close enough to bathe the vessel in fire. The heat and brightness of the crackling flames made Erasbella squint and turn her face away. But she didn't stop reaching for the arrow. There! A man screamed, caught by the inferno. But he ran out of it and dove behind one of the dinghies, rolling on the deck to put out his burning clothes. After blasting his inferno at the ship in general, the black dragon flew at Tavrock. Calmly, without releasing the brand, the captain drew a hand cannon and fired at the face of his foe. Its ammunition wasn't magic, and the lead ball bounced off the dragon's scaled cheek. Tavrock ducked low, evading talons that snatched at him, trying to tear off his head. More cannons boomed as the dragon soared past, missing him by scant inches. Archers and crossbowmen fired at the dragon's belly as it started to ascend so that it could dive again from a great height. Surprisingly, the ship hadn't caught fire. Was that black paint flame-resistant? From her knees, Erasbella turned the arrow behind her back and sawed at her ropes, wincing as she nicked herself and drew blood. If that was the worst of the wounds she received, she could consider herself lucky. As the black dragon climbed higher into the sky, Tavrock chose his moment to fire. With a great boom, his magical cannonball sped after it. The dragon was in the process of turning to dive again and tilted to avoid the projectile. But that particular ball flew faster than the others and caught him by surprise. The projectile slammed into the dragon's flank, eliciting a roar that sounded as much fury as pain. Tavrock didn't hesitate to delve into the ammunition chest to pull out and load another cannonball. With pure hatred in its reptilian eyes, the black dragon flapped his wings, recovering his equanimity, and turned to dive toward the ship again. Arrows and quarrels fired by the crew peppered their foe, but those weapons lacked the magic, the power, to hurt the dragon. Only one that struck near its eye made the dragon flinch, and only for an instant. Unrelenting, it descended toward them, roaring again with its sharp talons outstretched. A pained screech came from the sea to the port side. The brown dragon was attacking the smaller pale red dragon. Erasbella scowled. Hadn't the littler dragon been flying away, wanting nothing to do with the battle? Why were they attacking her? Surely not for the piece of meat clutched in her talons. Even as Erasbella watched, sawing at her ropes all the while, the Iliac tumbled into the water, forgotten. The brown dragon bit into the red's tail and neck, drawing more pained screeches. The black dragon roared as it tried to snatch up Tavrock again. This time the pirate captain had to fling himself across the deck, rolling behind another cannon to avoid being caught. As he leaped to his feet, the brown dragon sped in from the side, also targeting him. "Look out!" Erasbella called, not certain Tavrock realized it had finished dallying with the pale red dragon and was barreling toward his back. With his scimitar in one hand and the brand to light the cannons in the other, Tavrock spun toward the brown. Its talons caught him in the chest, tearing into his torso, but only because he stayed in place long enough to deliver a blow of his own. With his magical gargoyle bone blade, he lopped off one of the dragon's toes, then sprang high enough to slice into its scaled belly. "Good," Erasbella snarled, still angry with that one for attacking the young dragon who'd been fleeing. Attacking, or maybe even killing. The pale red dragon now floated in the sea, wings crumpled and barely stirring. Maybe Erasbella's anger was illogical, since that dragon had attacked her ships. But these new monsters were bullies. She could have guessed that even before they attacked. One of her ropes snapped, and she dropped the arrow, hurrying to untie the rest of her bonds. Meanwhile, Tavrock ignored his injury and returned to the cannon loaded with his special ball. He turned it on its pivot, tracking the black dragon, even though it was the brown that had wounded him. Now freed, Erasbella looked around for a discarded sword or another weapon that she could use. The weapons the rest of the pirates used weren't made from gargoyle bone, but maybe her inherent magic could let her deliver a blow that would hurt a dragon. The black was descending again, tilting left and right to avoid cannonballs as it picked up speed. Again, it flew straight toward Tavrock, opening its maw to try to incinerate him. Erasbella spotted an abandoned bow before she found a sword. After snatching it up, she ran back to grab the arrow that she'd used to free herself, though she fumbled to knock it, unable to tear her gaze from the dragon and Tavrock. The black roared, flames roiling in the back of its throat. Tavrock fired directly at its fiery maw. The dragon jerked its head to the side at the last second, just quick enough to avoid the cannonball barreling down its throat. But the projectile broke fangs and tore open the side of its snout. Tavrock leaped atop the cannon to meet what had turned into a discombobulated dive. As he'd done with the brown, he leaped high, higher than a normal man would have been able to, and swung his blade at its belly. The magical scimitar sliced through scale to lay open dragon flesh. Wings beating erratically, the dragon had to land on the deck before it could spring away. Men fired arrows, but those flapping wings struck pirates, clipping even Tavrock and knocking him back into the wheelhouse. For a moment, the dragon stayed on the deck, as if it would fight from its feet. But weapons shot at it from all sides, and Tavrock ran toward it with his scimitar. The dragon breathed fire at him, forcing him to roll away. But not before Tavrock hurled his scimitar like a throwing knife. It spun, end over end, and lodged in the creature's wing. For the first time, the mighty black dragon screeched instead of roaring. Erasbella took a steadying breath and aimed her arrow, hoping for an opportunity to strike at an eye. The injured brown dragon was flying away, and maybe the black realized it was alone because, instead of continuing to fight Tavrock, it shook its wing, the scimitar coming free, and leaped into the air. Erasbella loosed her only arrow. She managed to catch it in the wing, in the same spot where Tavrock's sword had gouged a hole. With the dragon's armor of scales already breached, the arrow sank in. It didn't stop the dragon, or even impede its flight, but the black was forced to fly away with it protruding. Erasbella slumped against the railing. She hadn't done as much as she would have liked. But at least the ship wasn't in flames, and she was still alive. Chapter 4. Erasbella watched as the wounded dragons flew away, the black looking back with fury in his cold reptilian eyes. Tavrock picked up his fallen scimitar, helped a couple of his men to their feet, then strode over to check on her, or more likely to make sure she didn't escape. His eyebrows twitched as he regarded the bow in her hands. Erasbella lifted her chin, feeling no guilt at having acquired a weapon. I thought my men tied you up. Tavrock reached for the bow. She almost tightened her grip to resist. But she didn't have any more arrows, so unless she wanted to club him in the head, there was little point in trying to keep it. After she released the bow, Tavrock brushed shards of wood off her shoulder. She hadn't noticed a nearby railing being destroyed in one of the dragon dives. He'd taken far more damage than she, with his shirt torn open, revealing a talon gouge slicing open his pectoral. If the wound bothered him, he didn't show it. They did, Erasbella said. I didn't like it. So you naturally freed yourself. Tavrock smiled as he glanced at the pieces of rope on the deck nearby. With dragons trying to light you and your ship on fire, it seemed like a good idea. I think the little red dragon is dead, sir, a pirate called from the opposite railing. Tavrock swore. I never meant for her to get in the way of surly adult dragons trying to kill me. The words didn't seem to be for Erasbella, but his concern for the dragon, for any dragon, surprised her. He jogged over to join his man in peering into the water. Erasbella looked at the broken railing behind her, thoughts of escape trickling into her mind again. But numerous uninjured and alert men remained at the weapons around the deck. If she'd meant to jump overboard and swim away, she should have done it during the battle. Though that might not have gone well for her. They'd sailed far enough that the Dolphin's spirit and its military escort, what remained of it, were out of view beyond the horizon. She would need to take supplies and a dinghy to have any hope of surviving in the sea of storms long enough for her people to find her. Haul her out of the water. Tavrock waved to a deck crane that was probably for loading crates of food and munitions, not dragons. Sir? One man asked in surprise. She's not dead. Judging by the expressions the men shared, that hadn't been the reason for their objection. She's injured and needs help, Tavrock said. Haul her out. Yes, sir. Two of the crew ran toward the crane. An older man with gray streaking his beard asked, Sentimentality, Captain, from Terror Tavrock? It's not a good idea to be responsible, or even be perceived as possibly slightly responsible for a dragon's death. Trust me. Tavrock pointed in the direction the two dark-scaled dragons had gone, but they weren't the ones he mentioned. The dark red dragon who was here earlier is Wreylith, and she's known to slay people for irking her. If she comes back and finds the one she was flying with dead, we could have another vengeful dragon after the ship. For all we know, this is a young relative of hers. Maybe even her offspring. Ah, I see your point, sir. I shouldn't have questioned you. No. Something about Tavrock's face as he pensively watched his men maneuver the ship and the crane so that they could pull the dragon out of the water made Erasbella wonder if he would have helped her even if he weren't concerned about vengeful relatives. Since the pale red dragon had destroyed her escort and damaged the dolphin's spirit enough to let the pirates board and kidnap her, Erasbella wouldn't have been quick to help her. But for some reason she caught herself nodding in approval that Tavrock would assist someone, or something, that had helped him. He stepped back as the wounded dragon was lifted aboard, blood seeping from deep talon and bite gouges in her scales and flesh. A few of those damaged scales fell free, tinkling to the deck like seashells, before the men settled the dragon aboard. Stretched out with limbs and wings akimbo, she took up much of the open space, with her tail dangling over the railing. She's almost dead, sir, someone said. Fortunately, almost isn't the same as completely. Tavrock held up a finger, then trotted below decks. Feeling almost forgotten as the men regarded the unconscious dragon, Erasbella looked toward the dinghies. But Tavrock soon returned, something gripped in his hand. A faint yellow glow leaked between his fingers. The moon mark on the back of Erasbella's hand warmed, her magic awakened by whatever that was. Tavrok stopped at the dragon's side and rested the tool, a fist-sized oval that was flat on one side, on her scales. He placed the open palm of his free hand next to it, closed his eyes, and tilted his face toward the sky. More attuned to magic than most, Erasbella sensed not only that the tool had power, but that Tavrok was calling upon power within him, a vestige that remained from a bond he'd once had as a dragon rider. Whatever it was, his entire body seemed to hum with power, and finding herself drawn, she stepped toward him. By now the sun was setting, bathing the sea in orange and beaming soft light on Tavrok's upturned face, making it warmer and more appealing. As the tool applied healing magic to the dragon, causing her wounds to stop bleeding and start knitting together, Erasbella took a few more steps until she stood at Tavrok's side. When a breeze swept across the deck, stirring the torn fabric of his shirt, she caught herself admiring the musculature of his chest. Knots and lines of scar tissue promised that hadn't been the first talon to gouge him. He'd doubtless participated in many battles in his life. The scars didn't detract from the aesthetic appeal of his physique and the perfect symmetry of his muscles. If he hadn't been her captor, the dreadful man who'd injured, if not killed, her people, she could have admired him without guilt. But she reminded herself that he had done those things. She had to look away and plan her escape, not imagine touching her lips to the taut curves of his pectorals. Eyes opening, Tavrok shifted his gaze to her. Embarrassed to have been caught ogling him, Erasbella pointed at the dragon. "Is there anything I can do to help?" His gaze remained on her, and she wondered if he could read her thoughts. Her cheeks heated. No, her entire body did. Why was she drawn to this villain? It was ridiculous. For the second time, Erasbella suspected that his magic, or even the magic of the ship, was affecting her, drawing her in a way that overrode the common sense that she usually, despite her sister's assertions to the contrary, possessed. "Yes," Tavrok said. "What?" For a moment, Erasbella thought he was reading her mind and responding to her musings on his magic. "You've a moon mark." Tavrok nodded toward the back of her hand. "Power gifted by the gods. You can help me heal her." "I've not studied healing. My magic usually helps with, needle point." It was true that she had an affinity for crafts involving needles, hooks, and other pointy objects, but she more often practiced archery and swordsmanship than embroidery. "Yes, you demonstrated that in your cabin." "Not sufficiently enough to avoid capture." "You were outnumbered, and I'm somewhat versed in needles myself." "I noticed." If he had been a thug of lesser skill, maybe she could have escaped this fate. "Put your hand on mine," Tavrok said. It sounded like an order, and her inclination was to bristle. She was the queen. He was a scruffy criminal. "To facilitate the healing, put your hand on mine to lend me your magic. The Neasarca knows how to take our power and turn it to healing." Tavrok nodded toward the glowing yellow tool. Though his words still came out sounding like orders, Erasbella had offered to help, so she did. She lay her palm on his warm skin, feeling the outline of his strong tendons and covering the faded dragon tattoo. Now that she was touching him, she could feel what she'd sensed before, his body humming with power. Only some of it came from the healing device, the rest. "What happened to your dragon bond?" Erasbella asked, curious about how he could have so much power if it was no longer active. Was she mistaken about the stories about him and what the faded coloring meant? Tavrok looked away from her, past the curve of the dragon's flank and out to sea. She died. The dragon you were bonded with? Yes, I was a rider, serving in the 16 Talons to protect the Stormers. Erasbella nodded, having assumed that. His experience in the elite Dragon Rider military unit explained his fighting prowess. Her hand tingled. Her power was being drawn from her and mingled with his before funneling through the healing device and into their patient. The dragon I was bonded with was named Zymera, Tavrok said, and we were close. Not all riders are offered a bond by their dragon, but she found me worthy and chose to link with me, to lend me her power. For years, we battled predators as well as human enemies. The look he slanted her reminded her that, to him, or at least to the Stormer tribes he'd been born into, she was an enemy. For centuries, the nomadic tribes and kingdom subjects had been at cross purposes, their meetings often turning deadly. When we were on patrol to protect the tribe during a stormy, wintry night, camping in the Everfrost Mountains, Tavrok continued, we engaged in a battle with what turned out to be a huge flock of wyverns that had been feeding on the magically tainted meat of avalanche goats. It made them bold, half-rabid, and very dangerous. Between a blizzard that came up and our frenzied foes, we were overwhelmed. Zymera gave her life to save mine. Had I the night to live over again, I would have switched places with her, sacrificed myself to save her. Our bond was strong, and her loss devastated me. His openness in sharing the story surprised Erasbella. As he spoke, he continued looking toward the sea, as if lost in memory and hardly aware of her. For once, his words weren't smug or arrogant. He didn't seem like he was trying to impress her. With much of his concentration on the healing, he was far different from the cocky pirate who'd stormed into her cabin. But she cared for me as well. She said I was a crafter, and my people needed me, so I had to be protected. Tavrok shook his head, as if he didn't agree. A crafter? Erasbella mouthed, looking at the tool. Had he made it? Those humans with inborn power and the ability to turn inanimate objects into useful magical tools had always been rare, and the texts she'd grown up reading had always suggested that they might not even exist anymore. Unfortunately, Tavrok said, his tone growing dry, her dragon lover did not agree with her assessment. He'd always disliked me, and he blamed me for her death. The black dragon, Erasbella said with certainty. Yes. After Zymera's death, he went to my tribal leader and military superiors, blaming me for bad decisions, and argued until my people agreed to turn me out of the tribe, to exile me. I hadn't broken any laws, and it wasn't their desire. But one must always walk carefully amongst dragons if one wants to retain them as allies. His lips twisted with bitterness. These days, I prefer the wild dragons, those who won't allow themselves to be ridden. They're more predictable and easier to understand than those motivated to ally themselves with men. Erasbella didn't know if the pale red dragon was wild, but she stirred at his words, or more likely because the magic of the tool was healing her wounds and she felt better. Sir! A pirate in the crow's nest called and pointed to the east. The red dragon that had been a part of the attack on Erasbella's escort was flying toward them. Hurry, Tavrok urged. The tool glowed a brighter yellow and drew more power from Erasbella. We don't want her to arrive and come to the wrong conclusion. Tavrok tilted his head toward the armed men on deck, some standing around their scaled patient, but more near the cannons and harpoon launchers. The weapons weren't pointed at the wounded dragon, But if his story was true, dragons were good at drawing incorrect conclusions. Even from a distance, the golden glow of the red dragon's eyes was visible. The cold gaze skimmed over the deck, lingering on Tavrock and Erasbella. Could the dragon tell that they were helping her ally? Erasbella hoped so, because so much power was being bled from her that she wouldn't be able to run. Weakness weighed down on her body, turning her legs leaden, her muscles rubbery. She caught herself leaning against Tavrock for support, though he swayed slightly too. He was also feeding all the power he had into the tool to funnel into their patient. As the red dragon flew closer, her maw opened. Were those flames forming in the back of her throat? "Do we fire, sir?" one pirate called. All the men fingered their weapons uneasily. "No," Tavrock said, his voice strong despite the weariness he had to feel. "That's Wreylith. She's reputedly even stronger than the black." The pale red dragon lifted her head and fluttered her wing. The oncoming dragon noticed and closed her maw. With her talons glinting orange in the light from the setting sun, she didn't appear any less dangerous. His tool in hand, Tavrock wrapped an arm around Erasbella's waist and stepped back, then shifted her behind him. She might have found the protective gesture noble, but remembered why he'd kidnapped her. If he was protecting anything, it was the gold he wanted to extract from her people. After another wing shake, the pale red dragon rose to all four legs. The other dragon, Wreylith, had arrived, but she didn't dive toward the pirate ship and light it on fire, probably only because her ally stood on the deck. Irritated smoke wafted from her nostrils as she banked to circle the vessel. More than once, she scoured Tavrock and Erasbella with her golden-eyed gaze, seeming more suspicious than grateful to them. The pale red dragon leaped into the air and flew over the railing, not acknowledging the humans who'd helped her. Wreylith gave the pirates and Erasbella a final glare, then also flew off, protectively close to the younger dragon. "As long as they don't light the ship on fire," Tavrock said. Maybe he'd also noted the lack of gratitude. "It seems surprisingly invulnerable to that," Erasbella said. "We've done our best to make it so." With his arms still around her, Tavrock let his eyelids droop as he looked toward her chest. "Your lingering power is making me tingle, your royalness." Apparently, with the threat of dragons and the need to heal gone, his cocky pirateness had returned. Her weary legs would have preferred she continue to lean against him for support, but Erasbella stiffened her knees and stepped aside, pushing his arm away. "Your people were right to exile you," she said. Briefly, sadness found his eyes, but he bowed to hide the emotion, saying only, "I suspect so." "I should not have left you," Wreylith said to Giamonda as they flew away from the pirate ship. "But you should also not have stayed and involved yourself in the affairs of humans."
It was the affairs of Zelrocklor that almost ended my life. Isn't he one of the Stormer dragons? I did not expect him to attack me.
"Both of those dragons are allied with them, but Zelrocklor is cruel and unpredictable. You'd do best to stay away from him in the future."
"Oh, I will. Perhaps you may have been right, Aunt Wreylith."
"Of course I was right. You are fortunate to have lived to learn the truth of my wisdom." Wreylith eyed the many talon slashes and bite wounds that marred her niece's flanks and belly. The bastard had even taken a bite out of the side of her tail. Fortunately, Giamonda was flying well, despite the wounds. The battle had been recent, but they were already healing, appearing many days, if not weeks, old instead of fresh. Surprisingly, those two humans had been responsible for that. At first, Wreylith had thought they'd dragged Giamonda aboard the ship to slay her and keep her body as a prize. Only as she'd flown close had she realized the pirate captain and the female he'd captured had been employing magic to heal her. Since it was the pirate's fault that Giamanda had been endangered, Wreylith did not feel gratitude toward him. But the female... She must have considered the pirate captain an enemy, but she'd joined her magic with his to assist in the healing of a dragon she didn't know. Wreylith would have to ponder that, and consider if she or Giamanda owed the human female a favor. Of course, dragons were not in the habit of doing favors for members of puny species. It was humans who usually gave offerings to dragons, acknowledging their vast superiority and attempting to appease them. If Wreylith did decide to assist the female in some way, she would do it without any witnesses around. She was a strong and powerful wild dragon. She would not let anyone witness her doing anything that a weak-willed, domesticated stormer dragon might do.
I am fortunate to fly with one so wise as you, yes, Giamanda said. Also, the iliac was delicious.
Worth almost being killed over.
There was seasoning on it, and it had been roasted to perfection.
Wreylith gave her niece a scathing look. Please tell me you've learned that even perfectly seasoned meat isn't enough to entice you to involve yourself with humans. When you were vulnerable on the deck of their ship, they might have plunged a sword into your heart instead of healing you.
That is true.
Also, roasting meat is for species with inferior teeth and capable of tearing it raw from the bone. Humans must soften their food first, like mothers regurgitating meat for hatchlings. They are pathetic.
Perhaps. But the next time you have the opportunity to try roasted iliac, you should try it.
I will not. To the north, in an area where the seafloor was shallow, a distant rock formation rose above the waves. 2 dragons perched upon it, one black and one a deep brown. They seemed to be bathing, or perhaps licking their wounds. Were they contemplating returning to the pirate ship to attack it again?
Zelrocklor and the Black Dragon.
Giamanda banked to fly past farther south, much farther. To keep an eye on her niece, Wreylith followed. But since the brown dragon had badly injured a member of her family, she longed for revenge. Further, the dragons had threatened the human female that Wreylith was debating granting a favor to. She would see her wounded niece to safety first, but she considered returning to challenge Zelrocklor to a duel. Chapter 5. Shall we set course for Castle Island, sir? One of the pirates asked Tavrock once the dragons were out of the sky. To make the ransom demand in person. Dread settled into Erasbella. They'd only been a few hours from the shield-protected safety of Sky-Torn Harbor and the capital when the pirates had attacked, so it wouldn't take long to reach the island. She longed to figure out how to escape before they could drag her ignobly home and humiliate her by trading her like a commodity. The fleet always attacks us when we near their shores, Tavrock said. But we do have a bargaining chip currently, and with the vengeful Black on the hunt, it might behoove us to spend a day within Castle Island's barrier. Erasbella clenched her jaw at the thought of the pirate ship skulking along the shoreline, gaining protection from the kingdom's magic, even as Tavrock sought to extort her people. Unfortunately, the barrier only kept out aerial predators, not other humans. Unless you'd prefer we dawdle, your royalness, Tavrock said to Erasbella, so you can spend a night in my bunk, writhing in the ecstasy and passion I mentioned, before you're returned to what I understand is your engagement to a staid old lord. All sign of the serious Tavrock, who'd let his guard down to heal a dragon and speak of his past, was gone. The only way I'd writhe in your bunk would be if bedbugs afflicted it, which is likely considering the known squalor that pirates live in. After Erasbella gave him the deservedly scathing reply, she realized she shouldn't have been so swift to reject the offer. Though the thought of undressing and having sex with an enemy, a loathsome kidnapper who wanted to sell her to her people, was deplorable, it might provide an opportunity to slip a dagger between his ribs. With someone who had as many enemies as he might even sleep with a blade under his pillow. Squalor, really? Jacqueline, do I look squalid? Tavrock asked one of his men. Sometimes, first thing in the morning, sir, or when you're deep in your cups after that dragon attacks. No, I look beleaguered then, but my hygiene is perfectly delightful. If you say so, sir. It might not be a bad idea to make the kingdom wait, though. Get their worry up about their lost queen. We could sail around until tomorrow before sending a messenger. I was thinking the same myself, Tavrock said. The pirate pointed at Erasbella. Shall we take her to a cell, or, elsewhere? Tavrock turned his gaze toward Erasbella again, his eyebrows aloft. Will you reconsider? I'd be delighted to change the linens for your sake, your royalness. Did he truly think that she would take him up on that ridiculous offer? Yet hadn't she just been thinking about the opportunity it could present? A far better one than she would get in a locked cell with a guard standing outside. His eyes narrowed as he watched her face. Once again she wondered if he had some mind-reading ability. But a dragon bond wouldn't have given him that magic, surely. Besides, if he were reading her mind, he would know that she wanted an opportunity to kill him. If she even changed her mind too quickly, he would be suspicious. As enticing an offer as fresh linens is, I'd rather sleep on the floor of a cell than with a heinous, murdering pirate who's full of himself. I can't believe any woman has ever gone willingly to your bed. Arms crossed over her chest, Erasbella didn't know what reaction she expected her insults to prompt. But his eyes sparked with interest, as if she'd delivered a challenge and he was eager to accept it. Allow me to show you otherwise. Tavrock strode toward her. She lowered her arms and crouched, prepared to fend off an attack. With a self-assured smile, he reached for her hand. She almost yanked it away. But she wanted to see what he would do. Kiss it? Like a minor lord trying to flirt with her at a ball? Standing before her, he took her hand and drew it toward his waist. For an instant, she thought he would do something crude, like press it to his crotch. But he rested it on the hilt of a dagger belted at his hip. Should you feel threatened, you may draw it. I know you know how to use it. His eyes gleamed with... Was that appreciation? Maybe he'd enjoyed that sword fight they'd shared in her cabin. Before she could consider the atypical captain further, Tavrock lifted his hands to her jaw, fingers tracing it lightly, awakening unexpected sensations within her body. Warm tingles flowed through her, both at his gentle fingers, but also at his proximity, at the sense of power that emanated from him and enrobed her. Once again, it awakened her nerves, stirring interest within her. One of his hands trailed down the side of her throat, and his earlier search came to mind, the memory of him tracing the curve of her breast. It tightened in response, as if eager for a more thorough exploration. Erasbella scowled, feeling betrayed by her body. He was a murdering enemy who'd attacked her people. She refused to be aroused by his touch, especially on the deck of his ship with his men watching. Tavrock smiled at her scowl, then bent his head to kiss her. She opened her mouth, intending to spit a protest as her hand flexed on the grip of his dagger. But his tongue slid across her lips and she paused, startled by the intensity of desire that flared within her. She caught herself leaning into him, pressing the soft curves of her chest against the hard planes of his. A longing to touch him, to explore his powerful musculature, swept into her. But she didn't let herself remove her fingers from the hilt of his dagger. He was giving her the opportunity she wanted, to draw the blade and plunge it into his heart. But he would be ready if she tried that now. He had to expect it. Instead, she kissed him back, thinking that if he were distracted enough. He responded to her kiss immediately, sliding one hand down to her waist, then around to her lower back. She felt the heat of his grip through the fabric of her dress, the bold and intimate touch, not as repulsive as it should have been. When he pulled her against him, his body was achingly hard against hers. She shifted against him, rubbing him, wanting him distracted, wanting him. Someone snickered, and Erasbella remembered all the onlookers. How had she allowed herself to forget them, even for an instant? Even if she succeeded in stabbing Tavrok, his crew would swarm over her. She would never be able to finish the job and escape. For that, she needed to get him alone. Erasbella released the hilt of the dagger and pressed her hands against Tavrok's chest to push him away. He didn't budge, his hand only tightening on her back, keeping her in place. She could feel his desire, his lust, against her, and knew he wanted her. Maybe he didn't care that his men watched. She pushed harder, a trickle of fear creeping into her for the first time, a reminder that she was alone and defenseless among enemies. Even if she objected, Tavrok might. With a soft nip at her lips, one that sent a shot of pure desire to her core, he released her and stepped back, his lips moist from their kiss. Her body, so awakened it was painful to be parted from his heat, almost prompted Erasbella to step after him. But she rooted her feet to the deck. The intensity in his eyes was palpable as his gaze raked her, lingering on her breasts. Damn, her nipples were visible through the fabric of her dress, and she didn't have a way to cover them. Worse, she couldn't get the memory of his hands on them out of her mind. "Take her to my cabin," Tavrok said, his voice husky as he took another step back. "Yes, sir." Erasbella let two men lead her away, but glanced back as they walked. Tavrok's steamy gaze was on her ass, anticipation and lust in his eyes. Her heart pounded at the thought of what the night might bring. Nothing, the rational part of her mind told her, nothing but her escape. She looked at the dagger at his belt as the men took her below decks. Tavrok smirked as his gaze followed her, and he didn't appear worried in the least. That was good, Erasbella decided. His overconfidence would be his downfall. Chapter 6. Full darkness had fallen outside by the time Erasbella stood alone in Captain Tavrok's cabin. Captain Tavrok's cabin that was overflowing with magic. With the exception of the enhanced cannonballs he'd used against the Black Dragon, all the magic she'd sensed below decks was centered in this one area, a compact space with little more than a bunk and a built-in wardrobe and desk with some glass-covered shelves. She lit the two wall-mounted lanterns so that she could more easily search for weapons. Surprisingly, numerous books were tucked into the shelf nooks. Stormers, having an oral tradition, didn't usually read, so they were either decorative or Tavrok had learned somewhere along the way. Curious about his tastes, Erasbella started toward the books. But it was the magical objects that pinged her senses and made her moon mark tingle. Drawn by them, She looked from tool to artifact to knick-knack, wondering what the objects did. Made from various materials, most gemstones or ivory, they were cut or carved in the likenesses of animals, birds, or sea creatures, with a few celestial bodies mixed in. If Tavrok had been telling the truth about being a crafter, he might have made some or all of the objects. They were so beautiful that she wanted to scoff at the idea and dismiss them as stolen, but did she truly believe that? For a moment, while he'd been speaking of his past and healing the dragon, he'd been something other than a pirate captain. Someone other. A single amethyst dragon gazed out from behind glass, protecting a shelf that didn't hold any books, only the figurine and what looked like a dusting of large purple scales glued to a wooden mount to keep them in place. Dragon scales? They had to be. The purple figurine's magic was more subdued than that of the other objects around the cabin, and Erasbella wondered if it was a likeness of the dragon to whom Tavrok had been bonded. Its sheer beauty attested to the time and love that the crafter had put into the work. Again, she wrestled with the notion that the cocky pirate might have created something so beautiful. It doesn't matter if he did. She stepped back and straightened her spine. He still kidnapped me and plans to ransom me to my people. For ice jade, if his words could be trusted. Did he need that to craft something else magical? She shook her head, again telling herself that it didn't matter. For the moment, she was alone in his cabin. She had to find a weapon that she could use when he came to her, no doubt with sex on his mind. She had no intention of spending the night with him, and hoped she could stick a dagger into his heart before she had to kiss him again. That might have been a lie. She might have found that kiss intriguing and arousing, but she held tight to it. As her sister would have been quick to point out, it wasn't appropriate to lust after someone who'd attacked her ships and hurt her people. Instead of indulging her curiosity about the books, Erasbella searched the cabin. As she'd been contemplating earlier, there was indeed a compact dagger under the small pillow on the bunk. She held it, surprised that what she'd sought had been so easy to find. The dagger seemed like it had been placed there as part of a trap, like it might turn on her if she used it. But she didn't sense anything magical about it. It was perfectly normal, sharp, oiled, and ready to cut a steak or a throat. After a moment's debate, she returned it to the pillow. He'll check there as soon as he comes in, she decided, and searched for a less obvious weapon. After all, a pirate ought to have blades stashed all over his cabin. She didn't have to search far to confirm that hypothesis. The desk drawers held 2 daggers, a grappling hook, throwing knives, a hand axe, and a hollow metal sphere that might have been designed to hold black powder. Some people keep paper and pens in their drawers. After quashing the notion of hurling a throwing knife at him as soon as he opened the door, Erasbella selected a small dagger. Let's stick with something we've practiced with more than 3 times. She smiled, remembering the bodyguard who'd been open to teaching her how to use weapons when she'd been young. He'd let her throw knives at a target in the castle courtyard, until her mother had found out and put a stop to it. She was fairly certain her father had approved. Her mother had passed long ago due to complications of childbirth, and was a distant memory in Erasbella's mind. But her heart ached at the recent loss of her father. Since he'd been older, his marriage to her mother, a second after the first, had produced no heirs. His passing hadn't been a shock, but it had devastated her. A thump in the corridor reminded Erasbella of her predicament, and she closed the drawer. She thought about finding a place in her dress that she could hide the dagger, but it didn't have a sheath, so it would be as dangerous to her as to a pirate. and Tavrock might get handsy and search her as soon as he stepped inside. Instead, she considered a nook near the door that held hooks for hanging clothes. It was just large enough that she might hide inside and spring out at him. But something would have to distract him so that he didn't look there immediately. It wasn't as if he wouldn't be familiar with the nooks and crannies in his own cabin.
Is she tied up?
Came Tavrock's voice from the corridor. Erasbella cursed to herself. There wasn't time to plan a distraction, but she scoured the cabin with her gaze anyway.
No, sir.
A pirate she didn't realize had stayed to guard the door said.
We figured you'd want her free and, spirited.
Her gaze landed on the purple figurine and the scales, items with precious shelf space to themselves that clearly had meaning to him.
I think she'd be spirited, no matter what,
Tavrock said. Erasbella ran to the shelf and lifted the glass.
Might be true, sir. Do you want me to wait outside, or...
Get some sleep, Brondar. In a few hours we'll reach the Castle Island Shield. Then we can all rest, safe from dragons, at least until the Kingdom Fleet decides to harass us.
Rude of them not to let us relax in their protected waters.
We did kidnap their queen.
They weren't letting us relax there before that, sir.
I know. The idea of a pirate ship taking refuge within the Guardian Kingdom's gods-gifted magical protection would have made Erasbella seethe if she'd had more time. Glad Tavrock had paused to chat, however briefly, she withdrew the figurine from behind the glass. She lay it askew on the wooden floorboards, making sure the lantern light illuminated it, and sprang into the nook. Her heart was pounding before the door even opened, knife in hand, palm already growing sweaty. She pressed her back into the cloaks hanging in the nook. A saber in a scabbard attached to a hook jabbed between her shoulders. Why hadn't she noticed that weapon earlier? Tavrock entered the cabin, so there was no time to draw it. He took 2 steps before turning in her direction, but before he faced the nook, his gaze caught on the figurine. As she'd hoped he would, he strode in that direction, footsteps swift, his hand already opening to reach for it. Erasbella sprang after him from behind, intending to land on his back and stab the dagger into his neck, before fear and doubt could thwart her. She didn't think she made a noise, but he must have glimpsed her or sensed her with his magic. Even as she sprang through the air, the dagger poised to drive into his vulnerable throat, Tavrock spun toward her. He caught her wrist, moving too quickly for her to evade, and grabbed her other arm as well. Before she could think of altering her attack plans, she found herself spun around him and slammed back first into the wall, her spectacles almost shoved off despite the strap holding them on her head. Tavrock surged in close, using his body to pin her while keeping his grip on her wrist, pressing her hand and the knife to the wall. Erasbella groaned, frustrated at herself for underestimating him. If only she'd had more time and could have planned something that would have given her more of an advantage. His expression mild, Tavrock looked down at the figurine. His face was close enough for her to see clearly, but with her spectacles askew, the little dragon was a purple blur on the floor.
"Thank you for not destroying that," he said. "It's precious to me."
"I am not a villainous pirate who wantonly destroys things."
"Fortunate for me."
He released her wrist, but only so he could reach up and force the knife out of her grip. He tossed it onto the desk, and it skidded to the far side. It would fly off when they crested the first swell, but she doubted she would get another chance to snatch it up. With a defeated groan, she let her head thunk back against the wall. Tavrock also removed her spectacles, untangling the strap from her hair. She would have objected, but he opened the top desk drawer and tucked them safely inside. They were within her reach, or would be if he released her.
"You are not at all what I expected from a queen,"
he said with respect, despite having easily disarmed her and now rendered her half blind. "I'm new to the job."
"You're not what I would have expected from a princess either, not based on what people say."
Since I've always been the heir, Father insisted the newspapers only print things that make me sound regal and proper. Erasbella twisted, wishing she could escape him, but he was using his body weight as well as his strength to keep her pinned against the wall. What an ignoble position to be trapped in, and it definitely wasn't proper. I admit I've not kept up with your Kingdom Journal, is it? He'd known about her engagement, so she doubted that was true. I had, however, heard about your knack for needlepoint. He twitched an eyebrow as he glanced at the dagger on the desk. My magic gifts me with a knack for wielding most points. So I've observed. A day ago, I didn't have any qualms about planning to use you to obtain the gold I need. But I didn't expect to find our engagements so scintillating, arousing. I just tried to kill you. Yes. His eyes gleamed. Was he pleased? You're as mad as the storm god. Perhaps so, but I don't think you mind as much as you pretend. Tavrock lifted his free hand to gently brush his fingers along her jaw. It shouldn't have tantalized her or stirred a deep, aching longing for more. Not when she was being smashed against the wall. The last thing she should have found his touch was appealing. But her nerves were illogical and sent little zings of pleasure through her. We're not having sex, Erasbella said, the words as much for her foolish body as for Tavrock. No, we can use the bunk. That would give you a chance to delve under the pillows and try again to kill me. I trust you noticed the dagger I keep there. Is it still there, or did you already secret it somewhere under your dress, perhaps? The gleam in his eyes sharpened as he considered the possibility, not with concern, but appreciation, anticipation. And why did her nerves quiver eagerly at the thought of him searching her again? She bared her teeth like a dog ready to snap, but she didn't know if the gesture was for him or for her own treacherous body. Tavrock chuckled. Perhaps we'll look for it later. We've a few hours to sail to reach the protection of your island shield, and then you'll deliver a ransom note to my people. That is the plan. Once more he trailed his fingers along her jaw, his touch light, teasing. Then he paused, fingers lingering to tilt her chin up. I'm not kissing you, she said. I thought I'd kiss you. Earlier you enjoyed the experience. You attacked my escort, sank my ships, kidnapped me, and want to sell me back to my people. And yet, enjoyment. I know I'm not mistaken. Erasbella shook her head. Tavrock kissed her anyway. In her mind, she longed to fight, to bite him, to knee him in the groin, and finally to jerk her head forward to break his nose. But that same magical allure, that power that had drawn her before, appealing greatly to her own magic, emanated from him now. It warned her that she wouldn't win if she fought him, and it promised her that she'd enjoy having sex with him. Oh, how it promised that. Pleasure sweeping along her nerves, rousing delicious sensations along every inch of her body. As much frustrated as aroused, Erasbella gripped his shoulders, fingers digging into his hard muscles. But she also returned his kiss, angrily, passionately. His mouth against hers, Tavrock smiled cockily. She wanted to punch him. But she almost groaned when his lips stroked hers, his tongue stroking her. It was so evocative. So tantalizing. Her nerves lit like fireworks, kindling heat and desire deep within her. Damn him! Almost growling, Erasbella pushed her hands up the sides of his neck, fingers brushing strong tendons, before thrusting into his curly hair, her nails scraping his scalp. He groaned with pleasure, and his kiss grew bolder, harder. The signs of his desire, the lust she stirred within him, should have repulsed her, but they excited her. He excited her. She caught herself arching into him, her mouth opening, inviting him in. Eager to accept that invitation, he slid his tongue into her, their lips flexing and straining, wrestling for dominance as well as pleasure. Her tongue fenced with his, even as she gripped and grasped his head, neck, and shoulders, while molding her body to his. His weight shifted so he could explore her with both hands, stroking and brushing her through her dress. His every touch elicited pleasure within her, heating her body, tightening her core, making it ache for attention that only he could give. So distracted by her response to him, it took her a moment to realize that he was searching her for weapons, brazenly. His hands followed the curves of her breasts before sliding down her ribs and waist. One hand descended farther, pushing up her dress and baring her thighs, then delving between her thighs, as if she would carry a knife there. Erasbella wanted to be offended, to drive her knee into him, but his fingers against her naked skin brought such pleasure, such intense anticipation of more, that she shifted her legs to give him greater access. As he rubbed her through her undergarments, feeling her heat, tracing her throbbing core. The smugness returned to his smiling kisses. He could tell she wanted him, the bastard. As frustrated as she was aroused, Erasbella dug her fingers harder into his scalp. She wanted him to know she didn't approve of this, of him. But that only seemed to increase his lust, just as his bold touches increased hers. She kissed him harder, wanting to wipe that stupid smile away. Even as she rocked into his hand, she never wanted his fingers to leave her core, to stop stroking her, unless it was to remove her undergarments, to touch flesh to flesh, to slip into her and rub her most intimate of parts, the center of her desire, her need. As she pushed against him, she lowered her hands so that she could lift his shirt up, needing to run her hands over his powerful musculature. He obliged, taking his hands from her long enough to tug the shirt over his head and drop it to the floor. Eager, she ran her fingers over his warm, taut skin, relishing in the hard curves of his muscles, though she avoided the bandage running across his pectoral, the injury he'd received fighting the dragon. By the moon god, he'd been magnificent and fearless in facing that foe. He'd injured the dragon as much, or more, than it had harmed him. Her hands lowered to the buckle of his belt. He growled with pleasure, then loosened the laces of her dress and lifted it over her head. He bared her breasts as she unfastened his buckle, pushing his trousers off his hips. This strong warrior was her enemy, but she couldn't help herself. She wanted him. Magnificent, Tavrock whispered, his gaze drinking in her exposed body as he dropped her dress beside his shirt. His boots and trousers soon followed, Erasbella helping him remove them as she looked him over, also admiring his statuesque physique. With their clothes removed, they returned to kissing and stroking, she touching him as boldly as he touched her. His warm, calloused hands were amazing as they scraped lightly over her skin. Never had she been so stimulated by a lover. Her groans of pleasure were completely inappropriate, but she couldn't help herself. When he lifted her to carry her to the bunk, she gripped his shoulders and wrapped her legs around his hips, pressing her coiled heat against his hard shaft. Primed by his fingers, trembling with a need that only he could satisfy, she ached to have him inside of her. She kissed him eagerly, demanding that he hurry. "Take me, pirate," she whispered against his mouth as he lowered her to the bunk. "That is the plan," Tavrock said with a husky laugh, coming down atop her, though instead of plunging immediately into her, he slid his fingers between her thighs again. Probing and teasing, he incited an even greater need within her, and she gasped and bucked. "I thought your plan was ransom," she panted. Feeling as brazen as he, she grabbed his shaft. As much as his fingers excited her, she wanted this. She wanted him to sink into her and satisfy her aching desire. "I wanted the queen for gold, yes, but I've wanted you since you fought me in your cabin." Those words should have angered her more than pleased her, but it excited her that he liked her, despite her unorthodoxy, or because of it. When he positioned himself over her, body taut with the need to plunge deep, she opened herself for him, wanting nothing more. With an eager hand, she guided him, groaning with heightened pleasure as he finally sank into her. "Magnificent," Tavrock said again, a lust-filled growl. Again he sank into her and she arched up toward him, taking him to the fullest. Soon words fell away, and sweat bathed their bare bodies as they found a rhythm, building toward ecstasy. Panting and gripping and thrusting, they grew frenzied as they crashed together faster and faster, their magic mingling, increasing the exquisite sensations of their joining. Finally, they climaxed, coming together with roars that would have startled dragons. Waves of trembling pleasure came in the aftermath, and Erasbella slumped back, exhausted, but more satisfied than she'd ever been in her life. By an enemy. A pirate. Tavrock tenderly kissed the side of her neck, as if she were a trusted lover, not a conquest. As she lay under him, her arms loose around his back, her legs hooked over his, she alternated between thinking about how sex with him had been magnificent and wanting to enjoy it again and about the dagger under the pillow. By all the benevolent gods, how had she found herself in this situation? Chapter 7. Erasbella lay awake while Tavrock dozed beside her, the heat of his body pressed against hers, her hand on his chest. The lantern still burned so she could make out his face, not cocky and arrogant now, just handsome, almost strikingly so. And his bare chest, that was handsome too. Even so, she couldn't believe she'd succumbed to his advances. She would keep blaming his magic. Whether it was the sole reason, she didn't know, but believing so made her feel better about her choice. A yawn made her eyes water. She didn't think she'd slept. How could she when she lay in the arms of an enemy? But her body had fallen into a deeply relaxed state, at odds with how she should feel while a prisoner aboard a pirate ship. But, she reluctantly admitted, the reaction hadn't been surprising considering how much energy she'd expended and how amazing the release had been. A part of her wanted to snuggle close to Tavrock, maybe stroke his chest in case he wanted to wake up for another joining. But she couldn't do that. She forced herself to think about the dagger under his pillow, and if he was really asleep. The relaxation of his muscles and his deep, even breathing suggested it. But he would be even more foolish than she to succumb to unconsciousness with an enemy in his bed. He knew she wanted to kill him. No, she corrected. She didn't want to kill him, but she felt duty-bound to escape, and it would be hard to slip away from him if she didn't. Even if he was deeply asleep and she had the capability to slit his throat with that dagger. Would she? Could she? After sleeping with him? She was not a trained seductress or assassin. She didn't know if she could completely separate her emotions from sex. Even thinking of her sister, last seen bound and gagged, and her bodyguard terribly injured on the corridor outside her cabin. She didn't think she could summon the wherewithal to kill him in cold blood. But didn't she have to? If she tried to sneak out, he would wake up, or a pirate would spot her before she could reach the dinghies. He stirred slightly, and she closed her eyes to feign sleep. She sensed him turn his head to look at her. One of his hands came up to stroke the side of her face, fingers brushing through her hair. A little shiver went through her as her body awakened again. But he didn't explore further, instead, easing out from under her arm. Erasbella slightly opened her eyes. If he left the cabin and there was nobody in the corridor, she might slip away. Of course, if he was only going to relieve himself, there wouldn't be time to reach a dinghy and lift it down into the water. Not unless she found the head and locked him in it. Would a pirate who'd fearlessly faced and driven away a dragon allow a woman locking him in the lavatory to defeat him? Probably not. Tavrock bent, giving her a view of his naked ass, and picked up the dragon figurine. Earlier, he'd been too distracted to do so, but now he placed it carefully back on the shelf, lowering the glass to keep it in place. When he turned back toward the bed, Erasbella closed her eyes again, willing him to leave to attend to his biological needs. And a long moment passed as he perhaps debated it. Or maybe he would go to the wheelhouse and ask his navigator how far they were from the protective shield of Castle Island. Instead, he slid back into the bed with her. His hand delved under the pillow, and alarm almost jolted her into opening her eyes as she imagined him deciding to kill her because she was too much trouble. But that wouldn't make any sense since he wanted to ransom her. She forced herself to remain still. Tavrock pulled his hand back out. Had he merely been assuring himself that she hadn't grabbed the dagger? And settled beside her again. Someone will come soon to let us know we've reached your island. Will I have to tie you up to ensure you don't fling yourself overboard and swim to shore? Apparently, he didn't believe she'd been asleep. Maybe he never had been either. Yes, she said. Make sure to leave something nearby, though, so I can cut the ropes as soon as your back is turned. He laughed softly. What did you use before? He slid the blanket down to gently clasp her wrist, and she opened her eyes. He was considering the small cuts she'd accidentally given herself. An arrowhead. Ah, careless of my men to leave them about the ship. They were somewhat distracted by the dragon trying to kill you. Does that mean I shouldn't order them flogged? I wouldn't, but I'm not a heinous pirate captain instilling loyalty through fear. He didn't respond with a witty barb. If anything, his face grew a little wistful, and she almost regretted snipping at him. But they weren't. They couldn't be. Confidants. Lovers. They'd had sex. Nothing more. I do have a reputation to maintain, he said after a moment. But I try to use rewards rather than punishment to instill loyalty. As you did with the little dragon and those haunches of meat. Exactly so. Dragons don't fear humans, not even remotely, so one would never gain the trust of one by delivering threats. Tavrock smiled faintly, his gaze shifting toward the shelf, the amethyst figurine. Is that the likeness of the one you were bonded with? Yes, it's a Krendala, and it was, linked with her. A Krendala. Erasbella had never heard the term. They are rare and can only be created with magic wielded by trained crafters. Tavrok touched his chest. They have the power to link a dragon to a human, similar to the bond that dragons can, through their inherent magic, create with riders. But it allows even more magic to flow between the two, and it also lets them communicate telepathically from a great distance. That one is. Since Zymira has passed, it's only a keepsake. One that meant a lot to him. They must have been close for many years. Losing her had probably meant more to him than being exiled by his people, though both must have been difficult. Does the dragon have to agree to having one created? Erasbella asked. I can't imagine many of their kind would want random humans linked to them. Tavrok snorted. That is quite true. The dragon has to give something of him or herself for the crafting process to be initiated. A scale is typical, though I've heard of a talon or horn clipping being used. There are tales of crafters who stealthily gained a piece of the dragon and created a Krendala. Never did the story end well for the crafter. Dragons aren't bound in any way by the figurines, so they needn't hesitate to slay someone who presumes to make one without permission. They then usually destroy the Krendala as well. There mustn't be many of them in the world. There aren't. Few dragons agree to their creation. What is the ice jade for? Erasbella eyed his profile, wondering if he would answer. Since she hadn't seen any pale blue dragons lurking around his ship, she assumed he wouldn't make another Krendala. But there were many other kinds of magical objects in the cabin. Tavrok didn't answer right away. Is it a secret? She arched her eyebrows. Some of my crew know my plans. So it's only a secret from me. Despite our delightful joining, we are enemies, are we not? Tavrok shifted onto his side to face her more fully, face her, and slip a hand under the blanket to rest on her bare waist. You're even now fantasizing about slitting my throat, aren't you? Not at exactly this moment. What about 5 minutes ago? Well, as you say, we are enemies. You decided that. She should have pushed his hand away, but she didn't, liking the feel of its calloused warmth, and remembering all the places it had intimately touched her. I did. Tavrok smiled sadly at her, with regret. Would he have made another choice if he'd known her better? He seemed to like women who repeatedly tried to kill him. A spirited opponent, he'd called her. If he had regret, he didn't let it lure him into saying that he would return her without collecting a ransom. He did, however, answer her question about the ice jade. I've a book on ancient artifacts and how to make them. One offers instruction on how to create a tool powerful enough to kill a dragon from a distance. Ice jade is the last of 3 rare gemstones that I need for the base materials. You want to kill the black dragon, she assumed. Ideally, before he kills me. At first, I understood his grief and wasn't plotting his demise. But he's come after me numerous times and killed many of my men in his attempt to get to me. I've done everything I could think of to harden my ship, and I've added magic to cannonballs, but nothing yet has been enough to defeat him or protect my people fully from him. And he's relentless in coming after me. Sometimes months pass between his attacks, and sometimes only days or hours. But no matter where in the world I sail, he never fails to find me. You could seek refuge under the shields of the Kingdom Islands. Wasn't that his plan anyway, at least for the time he was attempting to extort her people? Because your royal fleet would certainly welcome a stormer pirate and former dragon rider in their waters, he said dryly. Well, no. I have hidden briefly near your islands to escape him at times, but there aren't any places where there's more than a mile from the shoreline to the edge of the protective barrier, so it's hard to avoid notice from the various lighthouses and outlooks perched at all the high points along the coasts of your islands. In my experience, your fleet is swiftly dispatched to deal with pirates.
For the good of the kingdom, yes.
I suppose you'll continue that policy. His eyelids drooped as he regarded her.
Since you kidnapped me, I'll be compelled to keep you on the list of heinous enemies and have your ship attacked on sight.
Maybe he'd hoped for some kind of dispensation. She couldn't grant that, no matter how nice his hand on her hip felt. I assumed so. If he was disappointed, it didn't show. Instead, his eyes gleamed with the same kind of appreciation they'd held after she'd tried to kill him, and his hand trailed from her hip up her side to stroke the curve of her breast.
You're a presumptuous pirate,
she whispered, as heat and need tightened her core. Why did his touch feel so much better than that of any other man she'd spent time with?
Haven't we just reestablished that we're enemies?
I believe so, but I've never had such an incredible enemy, and I can't keep my hands to myself. Tavrock leaned closer, his mouth scant inches from hers, and her lips parted in invitation. Besides, I believe you enjoy my presumptuousness.
You're heinous and despicable.
Yes. But he wasn't. She should have hated him for attacking her people, but she'd learned too much about him. And when he kissed her, she kissed him back, finding the hard planes of his body under the sheets, running her hands over him, aching to be with him again before shouts came from the deck and a cannon boomed. Tavrock pulled away from her, his gaze shifting toward the ceiling. The fleet, Erasbella guessed, remembering his ship had been sailing toward Castle Island.
"Dragon!"
came someone's muffled yell through the wall. As Tavrock groaned and rolled out of bed, someone pounded at the door. "The Black Dragon is back, Captain!" Of course he is. Tavrock snatched his clothes off the floor. "Will you stay here where it's safe?"
"Are you going to tie me up?"
"There's not time."
"Then I probably won't."
He snorted and grabbed his scimitar. "Just don't get yourself killed. He headed for the door, not looking like he knew how to finish the sentence.
"Worth enough gold to buy a chunk of ice jade," she suggested.
"Important," was what he said, before disappearing into the corridor. Chapter 8. Cannons boomed, leaving Erasbella little doubt as to the reality of the threat. The pirates must not yet have reached the safety of Castle Island's shield. Unable to bear the thought of remaining in the cabin, especially when the ship might be destroyed around her, she retrieved her spectacles, then fished in the drawer of weapons. She was about to pull out the hand axe when she remembered the saber dangling from the cloak rack. She knew better how to use a sword. For all the good it'll do on a dragon. With the saber in hand, Erasbella looked around the cabin, as if some great dragon-slaying weapon might be mounted on the wall. The various magical tools drew her eye, but if any of them could have been useful in a battle, Tavrock would have taken them. He hadn't locked the door, so she slipped into the corridor and up the ship's ladder without trouble. On deck, a pirate running past glanced at her and opened his mouth as if he might yell to someone that the prisoner was escaping, but a roar off the starboard side distracted him. The black and brown dragons had returned, their dark forms barely visible against the starlit sky, but she could tell they were flying at top speed toward the ship. The black dragon's yellow eyes glowed. "Creep," she muttered as cannons fired. One ball sailed straight at the black dragon, on a trajectory to smash into its snout. Erasbella expected the creature to twist or dive to avoid it, as she'd witnessed several times during the first battle. But the fearless dragon opened its maw and snapped its jaws shut, timing the bite perfectly to catch the cannonball, as if it had been a toy thrown for a hound, not a weapon designed to destroy an enemy. Without missing a wing beat, the black opened its maw, dropped the projectile, and continued toward the ship. "When are you going to make that powerful dragon-slaying artifact, sir?" The pirate who'd fired the cannon called to his captain. Tavrok stood at the bow on the same rotating weapons platform as before, the chest of magical cannonballs open. With his scimitar in one hand and a burning brand in another, he must already have loaded one of his enhanced projectiles. "Soon," Tavrok called back, then noticed Erasbella. He lifted his scimitar, and she expected him to point it at her, maybe thinking how, as soon as they traded her for gold, they could get the last component he needed to craft that weapon. Instead, he smiled and saluted her with the scimitar before turning back to the cannon. The dragons were close now, the black angling downward, once again targeting him and him alone. Tavrok touched the brand to his cannon, and it boomed, launching one of the magical projectiles. This time the dragon threw itself sideways into a barrel roll. Maybe that cannonball would have broken all its teeth and driven down its throat if it had struck. Unfortunately, thanks to the creature's lightning-fast reflexes, the projectile only clipped its wing. It must have hurt enough to irk the dragon, for it roared, the noise drowning out the sound of waves crashing to shore. Erasbella blinked with realization. That was the sound of waves crashing to shore, wasn't it? She spun to look over the railing opposite the dragons and spotted a familiar shoreline in the distance. The lighthouse and castle on the bluff above sky-torn harbor were visible, with lanterns burning on the courtyard walls and in the streets of the city sprawling along the coast. More lights were visible on ships gathered at the mouth of the harbor. Ships ready to sail out to join the fight? Or had they been preparing to search the seas for her? That was more likely. This battle had just begun, and earlier they wouldn't likely have spotted the dark pirate vessel out beyond the shield on a dark night. Erasbella opened her mouth, before realizing that her fleet was too far away for her to call for help. 2 miles at least, she felt certain, the island and harbor coming in and out of view as the ship rose and fell on the waves, and the pirates were sailing perpendicular to the coastline, not toward it. She almost called to Tavrok to tell him to alter course, to sail straight toward the harbor and the safety offered by the barrier. Though invisible, she knew it was there, extending almost a mile beyond the coastline. But with all those military ships waiting, lying in wait, it would seem to Tavrok, the captain wouldn't see safety there. He wouldn't flee from the dragons only to run into more than a dozen fleet vessels there. As cannons boomed, pirates shouted, and the dragons breathed fire at the ship, flying low enough to tear at the masts with their talons. Erasbella realized she was being given a chance to escape. From here, she could swim to shore and be collected by her people. No need for a ransom, thank you very much. There were deadly fish and sharks in the waters, especially this far out from shore. But with the saber, she would have a chance to drive them off. "Look out!" Tavrok yelled. Erasbella's instincts cried out as well, telling her that the warning was for her, and she spun and ducked. The huge brown dragon soared right over her head, his talons slashing for her face. She flung the saber up in time to clip one of those talons, even as she flattened herself to the deck. The wind from the dragon's wing beats battered at her face. At least that was all it did. The brown continued past, ripping a piece from the railing when he missed her, then banking so that he could come around again. "Thanks," Erasbella yelled to Tavrok, but he turned back to face the black dragon. With fire streaming from its maw, it was diving for him. She scrambled to her feet, but what could she do with only the rapier? It wasn't a magical blade. She turned toward the railing again. She had to call the fleet, get them to go against common sense and come help with the dragons. Between all those ships, they had plenty of cannons, and they would come for her, wouldn't they? "That dragon is most persistent," A female voice spoke into Erasbella's mind. Startled, she turned in the other direction. Since the voice had spoken telepathically, she hadn't heard it, but it had seemed to come from somewhere out at sea. "Yes, I am here. You may call me Wreylith." "The red dragon," Erasbella replied in her mind, as she spotted another dragon approaching in the distance, a dark form barely discernible against the starry night. "I am indeed red." The dragon managed to convey dryness, even through telepathy. "I've been told by male admirers that it's a striking color." Bewildered to be discussing such a topic in the middle of a battle, Erasbella didn't know what to say. Fire streamed from the black's maw as Tavrok dodged and his men darted for cover. "We need help," Erasbella thought, though she couldn't imagine why the dragon would assist them. "Clearly. Why does that human not sail his ship toward the shield?" "My people would attack him. He's a pirate." "Shall I pluck you up and carry you to the barrier so that your ships might retrieve you?" "Yes," Erasbella blurted before she could think about the question. Only afterward did she realize the dragon was only making the offer to her. If Erasbella accepted it, she would be abandoning Tavrok and his men. "You were just planning to do that when you were contemplating swimming," she told herself with an eye roll. Why did this seem like more of a betrayal? And why did she care about the fate of her kidnappers? "Yes," Erasbella repeated firmly to the dragon. Wreylith was already swooping toward her, avoiding the black and brown dragons as she angled toward Erasbella. With those sharp talons stretching toward her, the words, "pluck you up," repeated in her mind, and she envisioned the dragon, unaware of how weak skin was when compared to scales, piercing her heart. Nonetheless, she stepped away from the railing and lowered the saber, preparing herself. "There's another dragon!" someone yelled. Tavrok, with blood spattering his face and his clothing singed, was in the middle of loading another of his magical cannonballs, but he looked at the rapidly descending Wreylith and also at Erasbella. He dropped the cannonball on the deck and sprinted toward her. The concern on his face promised he believed her in danger and that he wanted to knock her out of the way. Though touched, especially since the black was banking and coming around for him again, Erasbella shook her head. She lifted the saber toward Tavrok, pointing it at his chest. Confusion furrowed his brow as he halted abruptly and glanced again at the red dragon. A second later, Wreylith's talons wrapped around Erasbella, lifting her from the deck. They formed a cage about her torso rather than piercing her chest, and the red dragon started flying toward the barrier. Erasbella should have been looking toward the ships waiting for her. 2 had sailed out of the harbor and floated at the edge of protected water. But her gaze went back toward Tavrok. He'd lost the opportunity to fire at the black dragon when he'd run toward her, and now it and the brown were diving toward him from different directions. Would he be able to dodge both of them? "We have to go back," Erasbella blurted. "What?" Wreylith was already halfway to the barrier. "We have to help. I have to help, please." "Is that pirate not your kidnapper, who attacked your people?" "Yeah, it's complicated. I have to help anyway." When Wreylith didn't answer right away, Erasbella feared the dragon would ignore her. Then she banked to fly back toward the ship. "The brown dragon attacked my niece. We will slay him for his foolish choice." Erasbella would have preferred Wreylith direct her ire at the black dragon, but the brown was after Tavrok too. Taking out either opponent would help him. As Wreylith finished turning, the deck of the ship came back into view. Tavrok was still alive. Somehow he'd dodged both attacks, and now crouched atop the wheelhouse, barking orders to the men at his chosen cannon. Despite whatever fire retardant he applied to the ship, one of the sails was burning, and there were 2 charred bodies on the deck. Nonetheless, pirates loosed arrows and quarrels, their loyalty to their captain surprising. Once again, the black dove toward the ship. As Tavrok leaped from the wheelhouse to aim the cannon himself, the brown headed toward his back, but Wreylith picked up speed and arrowed toward that dragon. "Do you know how to ride on the back of one of my kind?" Erasbella glanced up at the smooth scales of the red dragon, the utter lack of a harness or anything that might act as a handle. Wreylith's horns were the only things one might logically grip, but Stormer riders didn't perch on their dragons' heads. "No," she admitted. "Then you must learn quickly. I need my talons to do battle." Before Erasbella could ask for advice on what to grab onto, Wreylith tilted and tossed her aloft. With the dark waves far, far below, Erasbella barely kept from screaming. She twisted, realizing that she would have to find the wherewithal to land on the dragon's back and hold on. But in the darkness away from the ship's lanterns, Wreylith was little more than a shadow. Fortunately, her throw had been precise, and Erasbella struck her back hard, landing on her chest, the blow knocking the wind out of her. She barely managed to fling an arm over the broad back. Right away, she started sliding and almost lost the saber. Her moon mark flared silver, and she envisioned the power that aided her with needlework and sword work, extending from her palm and sliding between the scales to create an anchor for her. It worked, and she stopped sliding. As she tried to sling her leg over the dragon's back, Wreylith dove and roared. From right atop the dragon, that roar was deafening and almost startled Erasbella into losing her magical grip. But she hung on. She had to. They were flying over the pirate ship now, straight toward the brown dragon. Perhaps sensing Wreylith's approach, or maybe she'd threatened him telepathically, he'd abandoned his dive to face her. They came together with a clashing of fangs and flapping of wings, their bodies gyrating in the air as they slashed and bit at each other. It was all Erasbella could do not to fall off. But when one of those wings battered Wreylith and almost clipped Erasbella, she managed to lash out with her borrowed saber. She willed her power into the swing and had the satisfaction of slicing the tip off that wing. Wreylith emanated tremendous power as she roared again, and with her fangs and talons, she did a lot more than cut off a wingtip, though the brown dragon managed to gouge her in the side, tearing away scales and flesh. That was the only blow he landed. Meanwhile, Wreylith shredded his chest and shoulder while biting his long neck. The blood of their enemy flew, some spattering them. The brown twisted, trying to escape. Relentless toward the dragon who'd attacked her niece, Wreylith flapped her wings hard in pursuit. With his back to her, she surged in to bite his flank, and then tear into his tail. Erasbella lifted her sword in case another part of that dragon came within reach. Below, more booms sounded on the pirate ship. Tavrok, no longer harried by the brown dragon, had found a moment to aim at the black again. One of his magical cannonballs flew true, blasting through the scales and lodging in the side of his foe. The black dragon roared in pain and flew away from the ship. He looked toward the brown, probably wondering where his ally had gone. Wreylith was still attacking him. After ripping a chunk from the brown's tail, she managed to claw her way up onto his back. He twisted and snapped his neck at her, but she used her fangs to parry his bites, then clamped her jaws around his long neck and shook him like a dog ending the life of a rabbit. Wings fluttering and talons swiping the air, the brown dragon screeched as he tried to escape. Erasbella got another chance to slash her blade into a wing, but she had no delusions that she was doing anything useful. Wreylith didn't need her help. After breaking the brown dragon's neck, she released him. Their enemy plummeted toward the ocean and plunged in 20 feet from the pirate ship. The landing created a wave that splashed over the railing and drenched the pirates. When the dragon surfaced again, he wasn't moving. The black dragon, watching the death of his comrade, must have decided the odds weren't in his favor. With a magical cannonball in his side, he flew away, though he glanced back, pinning Tavrock with a scathing look that promised he would one day return. Wreylith, her vengeance complete, didn't turn to pursue the Black. Instead, she flew toward Sky-Torn Harbor to take Erasbella to the ships waiting just inside the protection of the barrier. Erasbella looked back as they flew away from the pirate ship. Tavrock was watching her, his face hard to read, but he lifted his scimitar to salute her. She raised the saber to do the same. It saddened her that she wouldn't likely ever see him again, and she wished they could have parted with a kiss. But they were still enemies. This was how it had to be. At least they had both survived. Epilogue. Despite temple prognosticators' promising sun, storm clouds glowered over the sea and spat rain on the day of Queen Erasbella's wedding. The castle staff ran around, cursing the weather and making preparations to turn outdoor events into indoor events. Erasbella, dragging her feet as she washed and dressed, didn't mind the rain. It suited her mood, at least when it came to the man she would marry. The future seemed onerous. Oh, as her sister had pointed out, there was nothing wrong with Lord Garrington. He just wasn't the love of Erasbella's life. He wasn't even a heinous pirate captain who'd spent far too much time in her thoughts in the weeks since she'd returned to the capital. And in her dreams as well, the memories of their joining coming to her in the night, leaving her disappointed whenever she woke alone in her bed. Soon there would be another man there, and it wouldn't be Tavrock. Was he still alive? Or had that dragon gotten the best of him in the weeks that had passed? She had no way to know. A soft knock sounded at the door, and her maid answered it. Expecting her sister, who'd survived the pirate attack without more than a couple of bruises, Erasbella didn't look up. Not until an uncertain voice queried, "Your Majesty?" Yes, Erasbella recognized the dark-haired woman. She handled shipping and receiving for the castle and royal farm, didn't she? "A merchant delivered a wedding gift for you." The woman held up a parcel, a black ribbon dangling askew, as if it had already been opened. "He was elusive about where it came from, so we unwrapped it to make sure it wasn't something that would explode or otherwise harm you." "And it's safe?" Curiosity drew Erasbella to the door. Was that a hint of magic that emanated from the package? Something about it seemed familiar. "We aren't entirely positive, but you've a moon mark and magic, so we decided you'd be more likely than we mundane humans to know if it's a threat." Possibly so. Few without the god's gift or a dragon bond could sense magic.
"If it does blow up,"
a voice from the hallway said,
"you won't have to marry Lord Garrington."
Catella stepped past the women, peered into the box with a, "Huh?" and continued into the room. "I thought you approved of Lord Garrington," Erasbella said.
"He's a logical choice, but I know thoughts of him don't fill your dreams at night."
"No." Erasbella held her hand out for the box. Even though she loved and trusted her sister, she hadn't shared anything about the pirate who did fill her dreams. When she'd relayed the story, she'd spoken only of the dragon battle and how it had allowed her to escape. "If this blows me up, you'll have to be queen."
"Bloody daggers, you're right. Here, let me open that for her."
Catella intercepted the box. The woman let her, then curtsied and retreated into the hallway. Erasbella would have been content to let her sister do the initial examination, but she glimpsed something made from beautiful red glass. Or was that a gemstone? Ruby? Erasbella plucked it from paper crinkled protectively about in the box, though the magic suggested it wouldn't be fragile.
"Someone sent you a dragon?"
Catella stared at it.
A red dragon? After those 2 red dragons helped the pirates attack us? What kind of wedding gift is that?
It's beautiful, Erasbella breathed, knowing right away who'd made it, and knowing the dragon whose likeness it represented hadn't been the one to spearhead the attack on the fleet. Not only that, but the red dragon, Wreylith, she reminded herself, had plucked her up and brought her home.
Are you daft?
Occasionally. Erasbella ran a finger over the fine detail of the dragon figurine. The Krindala, that was the term Tavrock had given it. But he'd also implied, no, he'd outright said, that one crafted without the permission of the dragon was a bad idea, and she couldn't imagine that Wreylith had given him that permission. Maybe Tavrock had thought it wouldn't matter, that Erasbella would be here, safe on her island under the protection of the shield, and Wreylith wouldn't be able to reach her, or the Krindala, even if the dragon did object to its creation. Maybe Erasbella was simply meant to put it on a shelf as a keepsake. But if that was all it was meant to do, why would Tavrock have bothered imbuing it with magic?
Do you know who sent it?
Catella fished in the box.
There's not a note.
I know. Her sister looked expectantly at her.
Are you going to tell me?
Maybe someday. Catella propped a fist on her hip and opened her mouth.
Dragon!
A soldier cried out in the courtyard. What? Erasbella ran to the window. Uniformed men in the courtyard and on the castle walls were looking upward. Since Erasbella couldn't see much of the cloudy sky from her suite, she ran for the hallway, the figurine clutched in her hand. What if Wreylith had come, furious that the Krindala had been made?
Where are you going?
Catella yelled after her. I have to see the dragon. Maybe she had to apologize to the dragon for Tavrock's presumptuousness. Had Wreylith lost a scale during the clash? One that had fallen to the deck of the ship where Tavrock had plucked it up to use in the crafting?
You're supposed to hide when there's a dragon, Catella called, not run into the open to gape at it.
We've discussed my unorthodoxy as a queen, Erasbella yelled over her shoulder before rushing into the courtyard.
Your Majesty!
Several guards blurted as soon as they saw her. They tried to shoo her back toward the door. She dodged their advances. Thank all the sword-fighting lessons that had granted her the ability to do so, and ran into the center of the courtyard. From the commotion, she'd expected to find that a dragon had penetrated the barrier and was diving for soldiers with talons outstretched. But the red-scaled dragon, bright even against the cloudy gray sky, flew in lazy circles high above. She's above the shield, Erasbella said, raising a hand toward the guards trying to swarm her and whisk her back under the roof for her own good. There's nothing to worry about.
Dragons have been known to drop weapons.
Last century, a dragon dropped a boulder on a lighthouse that was apparently shining too brightly out to sea and disturbing its fishing. Erasbella kept her palm toward the men as she watched Wreylith circle above. It's not exactly a trend, not like with the seagulls. They, having no respect for royalty, dropped scat all over the courtyard and castle roof.
You have a Krindala,
Wreylith boomed into Erasbella's mind. She licked her lips and pocketed the figurine, as if that would hide it from a dragon that could sense magic. Despite her words to calm the guards, she wasn't that certain she would be safe if Wreylith had come to destroy the Krindala, or her. I didn't request it, Erasbella replied in her mind, trusting the dragon could hear her. Someone sent it as a wedding gift. Someone! I suspect Captain Tavrock. Of course it was he. The presumptuous, arrogant human had the audacity to ask if he could make it for you, using my scales. Scales torn off my flesh by the odious and obtuse dragon who attacked my niece. Did you tell Tavrock not to make it? It sounded like she had, but Erasbella would be surprised if he'd crafted the Krindala and sent it to her, knowing it would piss off Wreylith. I almost slew him for his audacity. I think you didn't answer my question. Dragons are not obligated to satisfy the curiosity of lesser species. I wouldn't think so, no. With that established, Wreylith said, I didn't forbid him from crafting it. Why not? It was for you. You are an atypical human female and do not fear battling foes. Unorthodox is the term my sister uses. You have dragonish tendencies. Was that a compliment? It had to be. Thank you, Erasbella said. You also assisted in healing my niece. I did, but Tavrock was mostly responsible for that. That is the only reason I haven't slain him for his audacity. Besides, the Black Dragon will likely kill him soon. There is little reason for me to bother. He might surprise you and defeat that dragon, Erasbella said, before remembering that Tavrock had failed to ransom her for the gold he needed to trade for the ice jade. That is possible. That dragon is powerful, but dull. That was my assessment of him, too. Should you wish to fly somewhere in the future, or need the assistance of a dragon, you may call to me through the Krendala. Wreylith banked and soared out to sea. Stunned by the offer, it was a moment before Erasbella could reply. Thank you. The assistance of a dragon is a great gift. Immensely so, yes.
Thank the gods, one of the men said. It's leaving.
She's leaving. Erasbella drew the figurine from her pocket to gaze at it. But not forever, she whispered, and smiled. Suddenly her wedding day and her future didn't seem quite so onerous. The end. This has been Wreylith, a Fire and Fang story, written by Lindsay Baroker, narrated by Vivian Leone. This program was produced by Tie Def Studios. Copyright 2025 by Lindsay Baroker. Production copyright 2025 by Lindsay Baroker. Thank you for listening.